Good? Okay. All right. Call the October 6th meeting of school committee to order. Sorry for that delay. For folks who are new to our meetings, our IT team has done incredible work implementing this great new hybrid video system, and I managed to break it 3 minutes before the meeting started. So my apologies for that. We're back up and running. So I'm going to just quickly run through the agenda here. I know we've got some folks who joined us for our first couple items on the agenda tonight, so we'll get there very soon. So we're going to take a couple of items in new business out of order. So we've got some national merit recipients that we're going to recognize this evening. We'll introduce the new RMHS Student Advisory Committee, move into our public comment period for anything that's not on the agenda. We'll take the consent agenda and then we'll take reports. We've got entry updates from 3 of our new principals this year, as well as Dr. King, who's returned to lead the RISE program. And then in old business, we will review the RMHS handbook updates that have been pending, I think, for a few meetings now. And then when we return to the new business section, we've got a number of items of business here. So we'll start. We'll have a brief discussion around the MASC joint conference in November and assign a voting delegate if there is one to be had. We'll then, Dr. Hardy will overview our MCAS results and we'll have some discussion there. Dr. Milichewski will take us through a review of the measurables, if you will, for our district improvement plan. Ms. Baton will then share the unofficial October enrollment update, and then 2 finance-related pieces, one which is our town school agreement, and one which is our 2020 or FY22 end-of-year financial summary. And we will take a vote on some budget transfers at that time as well. So that's the agenda for this evening. With that, I am going to hand to Dr. Milichewski for our first order of business.
Great. I'm a little biased here, but we're going to start with the best part of the agenda here. I think it's the most exciting for all of us educators here, is to recognize some tremendous academic accomplishment from several of our own RPS students, who I know many are here with us tonight. So to share a little bit of context, now we're going to celebrate and recognize those who have received national merit recognition for their academic achievement, particularly their scores on the PSATs. So to give a little bit of context, tonight we have students who fell into 2 categories. The first is commended students. So these are students who scored the top 34,000 out of 1.5 million entrants across the country, which if you run the numbers right there, is right around the top 2%, incredibly competitive. And then we also have 1 student who fell in the semifinalist category who will move forward, and that was in the top 16,000 students out of, again, 1.5 million. Again, that's about the top 1%. It's an absolutely tremendous academic accomplishment. We had a breakfast last week to recognize our students who received this recognition. And I share this at breakfast too, is that this doesn't just reflect what we think is an amazing score on a test. We know that for all the students who will be recognized tonight, this is the culmination or part of the process of all of the hard work and effort and time that you put into your studies over the years, your dedication, your commitment, and it's truly amazing and admirable. Thank you for setting a really high bar for yourselves and for the rest of our community. We look forward to calling each of you up tonight to congratulate you and also give you a little bit of Reading swag. So thank you to our HR department. That we have a little tumbler here tonight with the Reading tree on it too. So we'll invite you up one at a time, and then we're going to post for a picture after too. And I think I speak for the entire committee that we are a district that's really committed to honoring high academic achievement. That's certainly one of the things that we think is a priority for us in our district, is to hold students to a really high bar and celebrate the students as they achieve it. So congratulations in advance, and thanks for joining us tonight. So let's start, first of all, with our commended students. I'd like to invite up Althea Kulaba. Brendan Manning. Also received as a commended student, Luca Morin. Next up, Liam Sennett. Next up, Michelle Walsh. And then a little bit of context, we're going to recognize our semifinalists as well. Our semifinalist, Abigail, will move forward in the process as one of the final 16,000. We'll certainly keep the community posted as we know kind of how she moves forward in the process, as potentially as a finalist as well too. So Without further ado, Abigail Lebovich, congratulations. I'd like to invite up all of our recipients here for a quick photo for the newspaper.
We got cut out by the newspaper guy. I see you. Stand over there. All the parents are right behind you.
Pressure.
All right. One, two. Yeah, flash one off, yeah.
Parents all good?
You want
Parents have their picture?
any family photos? Good.
Don't break any more. Congratulations, you six. Great job.
Congratulations.
Congratulations again. We are very excited about what's ahead for each of you. Obviously, I think along with your families, we have very, very high hopes for what the future here at RMHS holds and then beyond. So thank you and congratulations. We can go right into the next one. Okay, so moving forward, the next part of our agenda, we're going to speak a little bit about our RMHS Student Advisory Committee. So to give a little bit of context, I think traditionally most districts to have a student representative on the school committee, just move forward through a process of naming a senior to serve as the student representative. As we dove a little bit deeper into MGL, for us who love to just peruse MGL from time to time, we found that there's a process that MGL outlines that we should go through in terms of building out our student representative, who's our student representative, and also building out what MGL says is student advisory committee to give a direct voice from students to the school committee, which we think is important. So in compliance with MGL, we're shifting our practice a little bit this year. So what we've done is MGL outlines that each school district should have 5 students comprise a student advisory committee or a student advisory committee to the school committee. Once those 5 students are selected and named, that group, the advisory committee, meets and they nominate a chair, and that chair then steps up and then becomes the non-voting member and the student representative to the school committee. So tonight I'd like to point out and name those who are going to be serving on our student advisory committee, name each of their roles, and then speak about a little bit about what that means. So first tonight we are joined by 2 RMHS seniors. First, we're going to be joined by Jada Hayes over on the far side. So Jada was named our chair, the chair for the student advisory committee. So that'll be her role. Also joined by Jada up front is Olivia Rotondo. And Olivia, along with Samantha Maher, will be our co-chairs or vice chairs to the student advisory committee. We'll also be 2 other members. We have a junior liaison. Our junior liaison will be Emily Goodhue, who's not with us tonight. And also our sophomore representative or sophomore liaison will be Tamia Jones. So those 5 will comprise our student advisory committee. So we met the other day, both myself and Principal Tracy with the 5 members. We talked a little bit about what's the role of a school committee, what's the role of representatives, and also what does it look like for your role. What we landed on is that the community can expect to have at least 1 member, most usually our chair, to provide reports and also engage sort of in a non-voting way as part of the school committee. And also MGL outlines that this committee should meet with our school committee every other month during the school year. We're still waiting some guidance from legal counsel on what exactly does that look like. Is that an open meeting between the school committee and the student advisory committee? Does that happen as a subset of a school committee meeting? So I think, again, being that there's not a ton of districts who are moving forward with this practice currently, we're still seeking some more guidance on what that's going to look like for us. I think we are really excited that 5 of our students are going to be having a direct voice to our school committee, and we think that can be really powerful for our students to help provide influence and perspective and collaboration as we think about setting policy and setting the direction of the district. Before, I know Jada in a little bit will give a report, but I'd love to have Jada and Olivia just quickly share a little bit about themselves, just sort of what they're involved in here and their involvement in the community, just so the community gets to know them each a little bit better. So why don't we start with Olivia? You started going forward, so we'll start with you.
My name is Olivia Rotondo. I'm a senior here at RMHS. Right now I'm doing soccer and I'm captain for indoor and outdoor track. I'm a part of some clubs. I'm in Girl Rising, photography, and Rocket Leaders in Action. As well as I volunteer at my old elementary school, Killen Elementary School, at the Extended Day program.
My name is Jada Hayes. I am a senior here at RMHS. I am on the varsity hockey and I am the varsity lacrosse goalie. I am the president of Molly Len and I am on the mock trial team, and I currently volunteer on some political campaigns as well.
I think you can tell both are extremely involved, as are the other 3 members of the student advisory committee. And I think what they did not share is that they're also extremely well respected by their peers and also by the staff at RMHS. When we talked to the RMHS staff about this process, I think these are students who they thought would be wonderful representation of the students in the school. So thank you to Olivia, thank you to Jada, thank you to Emily, Sam, and also to Tamia for volunteering and supporting our committee. Really excited to see how your leadership impacts the direction of our district. So thank you.
Great. I'll just add, in our last meeting, we sort of innocently thought, hey, we should have more than one student rep on the committee. And as we started exploring that, it turned out to be quite a bit more complicated. But I think this is a really good outcome. Not only will we be one of the few districts that is compliant with MGL, but I think we all value more student voice, and we're thrilled to have not only 2 of you, but your 3 peers as well joining us, and we'll figure out all the ways to kind of make sure that you have a voice with this committee. So thank you very much. And thank you to Dr. Milczewski and Principal Tracy for running down all the loose ends and all that as well. So thank you all. Okay, so with that, we will move on to public comment. So if there's anybody in the audience who would like to comment on anything that's not on the agenda this evening, now would be your opportunity. Seeing none, we will move on to the consent agenda. And do we have a motion?
I move to approve the consent agenda.
Is there a second? Seconded by Chuck. Any discussion on the consent agenda? Seeing none, we'll take a vote. All in favor? All opposed? And it carries 6-0. We will move on to reports. I didn't really think about this. We're gonna throw you guys to the wolves and ask you to go first because you're listed first on our agenda. So, any reports you have for us this evening?
So we've just come off of a week-long spirit and homecoming festivities that included many event days within the school and theme days, as well as some football games and other sporting events and a dance. We just opened the new turf, and we've had fantastic attendance at many of our football games, field hockey games, soccer games, and many of our sports are poised to make playoffs this season. We had an anti-bullying BMX assembly recently, which was interesting. And seniors have our college apps for early decision and early action, mostly due on November 1st, which many of us are anxious and excited about. And we have just launched the Smart Pass system to help kind of regulate traffic and hall passes within the school.
Thank you very much. Dr. Hardy.
Good evening, everyone. I just have one update for you. I wanted to share some exciting news that here at RMHS, we are launching our academic lab next week. You may remember that this is something that Principal Tracy started talking about with us last year as he looked at the supports across our high school and envisioned how can we help our students support, how can we support our students who really need that little bit extra in order to get through maybe an assignment they're struggling with or a particular piece of content where they need something beyond just what their classroom teacher can give. So this is beyond a tier 1 intervention. This is a support that would go beyond what the teacher would do to support a student who might be struggling in the class. And what it is an opportunity for students to come. We have held here in our library, and they would come during a free period that they might have. And the library will be staffed with our teachers. And we'll be sharing with families tomorrow the exact schedule. They'll be able to see the teachers that will be here. We're really excited about the number of teachers who really wanted to participate in this and help our students. So when students come, they'll have an opportunity to get support in something that they need help. Right now, there's kind of two ways for students to access this support. It can be self-selected, so students have that chance to feel empowered and feel that they are able to advocate for something they need. And then there's also an opportunity for teachers to refer students, and there's a form they can fill out and indicate the support that they're feeling from the student needs. So it's kind of two ways that can be accessed. I just want to note this is something that's a short-term intervention, so something the student would access for a limited period of time, just to help in a particular area. And it doesn't replace the support teachers give in the classroom. So families will receive more information about this tomorrow, more details, and it's something too that is new here. We're excited about it. So we'll be really monitoring progress, monitoring what's working, what's not working, so that we can continue to tweak as we go. And in general, we're really excited. We know that this is the type of support that students need. We need to vary the supports we offer so that all of our kids can be successful.
Before I go to Ms. Baton, I should have mentioned, you two are not obligated to stay for the whole meeting. You've run quite long, so unless there's something else you're particularly interested in, we heard how busy you are, so you're always welcome to leave after your report. So it's up to you, but I just wanted to make sure you know that.
You can stay till 11 tonight if you want.
Yeah.
You might be here that long.
I won't be here.
We won't.
Ms. Baton.
Wait, there's a question over here.
Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead, Chuck.
Thank you, ladies.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Hardy. How did we settle on compensation for the teachers that are the staff?
Yeah, so you're able to get a signed agreement with the RTA, and so it is it's a teacher duty. So there's no additional compensation to
Okay.
teachers.
Thank you.
Can I just ask a clarifying question about access there? Is it only during study halls? Is it available during flex block? What about after school hours? Is there any coverage in those time periods?
That's a great question, and this is one of the pieces really where we want to make sure that we're developing this program so we reach the most kids. Right now, we're looking at each block throughout the day so that when kids are studying, they can come down. As far as extending it, those are some of the options we're looking at. In addition, an area we're looking at for extension going forward is some targeted executive functioning supports as well. So all really great points. The more opportunities students have to come in and advocate for themselves and get the support their teachers feel they need, we know will benefit them.
Good, Chuck. Yeah. I'm sorry, Tom and then Aaron. I was looking at Chuck.
Aaron, I may
Tom, go ahead.
have the same question. We'll see, because that piqued my interest pretty quickly there. Not every student has a study time in their schedule, right? So for those students that do not, is there an opportunity where if they're in a class that they're doing well, they can get a pass to go to this study area for something else? Or have we thought flexibly about some other way that they could be attending to catch up with certain other subjects?
That's a great question, and that's definitely one of the things that we've been talking about. Again, we're trying to walk that line of we want to ensure that the classroom teacher has that primary responsibility for tiered instruction in the classroom and making sure that kids have access to all the instruction that they need for a particular assignment or to master content. And so it's something that we're talking about, but at this point, we don't want students leaving their general education classroom, their core class to go down and receive support from the teacher.
Just going on that real quick, I agree with that, but I think we need to figure out how to close that gap, right? And to just, Sarah's question, whether it's after school, whether it's before school, many of the teachers come before school and offer support in their classrooms. If that was centralized here, that might make more opportunities available. That group of kids that has 7 classes will have no support in this realm right now. So we need to figure out how to close that, especially if we're not offering flex block, which is what I heard in your answer as well, just studies. So I think that's something hopefully we can close as the year goes on.
It's a really important point.
Aaron, like you said.
So this is more of a logistical question, but say a student has their study during E-block and they need help with chemistry. Is there going to be a science teacher there during E-block?
That's a great question. So the schedule for how teachers are placed in blocks was done as thoughtfully as possible so that we looked at, when Jess Callahan looked at the teachers that are available, tried to rotate them. So there may not be a science teacher there every day. There'll be a science teacher there some days. What we have right now is about 2 teachers per block.
And I missed it. Where is this taking place? Right here in the library. Okay.
One thing I'll also share too is a decision that the high school team made today too, is whether when tomorrow the schedule will be released to families as well. They will also note which teachers will be teaching. And they won't just say math during this block, they'll say math, and this is the teacher. We thought that that was important because some students we know already have a relationship and rapport with some staff, so it may be a draw for some kids as well to be able to pull in. And also for families, we thought also if families see that there's some staff that are already comfortable, that they know that might help give a little bit of a push too. So tomorrow when that schedule is released, it will be attached to this content area and staff name. Sarah.
So following up on that line of thinking around the kids who don't have a study hall, do we have a sense of what percentage of students do not have study? What's the magnitude of I've heard a lot of them don't.
Pretty high.
So how do we make it equitable for those students, whether that's before or after school, or if they're motivated to go and get the help? I think we should make sure that they can access it.
Really good feedback.
So they always have lunchtime as an option as well. So students can decide to go on their own, or the teacher can recommend that they go. And they need to get a pass to do it.
Yes. Yeah, they were updating the pass system to ensure that it would be ready to go.
And can they initiate that? They can't initiate that pass system on their own. It has to be done by a teacher.
I'm not 100% up on the procedure for the new pass system. I think I can find that out for you.
I thought that a teacher had to do it, but I guess they could probably ask any teacher that they're in their classroom.
I know that's one of the things that the assistant principals at the high school were working out, like exactly how the pass system worked.
Thank you. Ms. Baton.
Yes, so this evening we will be speaking about district improvement goals, but one of the evidence, one of the pieces of evidence that the operations strategic goal will put forward is an assessment of our food service program. And I wanted to share with you all that this week, the food service director, Kathy met with John Levin, who is a consultant with Advocate Student Services Program out of New Jersey. He has been in the food service industry for many years and conducts food service assessments of public school programs. He came in, met with Catherine, and discuss our visions for the food service program and to outline ways in which we might be able to elevate the program. He's preparing an overview of what we do for us, which would begin essentially with an assessment of different aspects of the food service operations, the nutritional value of the meal, and the finances. He is planning to work with Catherine, myself, and the food service team in collaboration with principals. So we're working on this program all together. We're very excited about it. Also, I have a message from Catherine to you all in the community. She would like parents and students and caregivers to be on the lookout for her survey that she calls Let Us Know What You Think. She is interested in hearing back from students and families about what's important to them in terms of a school menu. And with this information she gleans from the surveys, she'll be using student voice and family's voice to prepare November's menu. She has worked here at the high school with the wellness committee to get the survey out to our students. She's worked with our middle school principals to have the survey placed in tomorrow's newsletter and via email over the weekend for students and families. And she will be working with the elementary school principals to come up with a user-friendly survey for our elementary school students so that we can hear what's important to them as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions?
The percentages too.
Oh, yes, I was going to speak a little bit about this during my quarterly
yeah,
report, but I think it's big news, so I should share it now. Just in the 4 weeks since we've opened school, I wanted you all to know that between the first week of school and this week at the high school, our participation has grown by 77.5% in our school lunch program across the district. It started at the low 40s last year, at the beginning of this year, and it's now up to nearly 59% participation. I stopped at the loading dock this morning, and I was blown away. There were cases of fresh melon, strawberries, blueberries, celery, carrots, onions, watermelon. It was just string beans. It was just unbelievable, that fresh, wonderful food product that's coming our way. And the best part of it is that it's government commodities. So we are getting all of these fresh array of fruits locally sourced from the state as just part of the food service program. So exciting things are coming our way under Catherine's leadership.
It is exciting. I would be remiss if I didn't point out that my wife and I haven't had to pack a lunch for our 2 older kids in, I think, 3 weeks. And so we're very happy. So we've seen the changes, and the changes already. It's been very positive progress so far. So thank you. Anything else? Okay. Go ahead, Carla.
I walked out of central office on Wednesday and smelled like something delicious, and I kind of like stopped and thought, what restaurant is around here? So it was like, it made me think. I was like, wow. So.
Nice, thank you.
Okay, Dr. Milichewski.
I have a couple updates, but I have to have fun with 2 of the things I just heard. The first one is this: I did read some of the survey results already from RMHS of what students are asking for. The majority were very serious and really good insight. There was a couple of students who were putting that we need to go more filet mignon every day for this. I appreciate raising the bar. And then the BMX anti-bullying presentation.
I wanted more information.
I got a video. You want to see the video?
There is a video circulating of Principal Tracy sitting in a chair.
Yep.
Has anyone seen it? With a BMX bike come off that I think
Here we go.
touches very close.
It's
to
not
the,
just a jump, it's a backflip.
It's a backflip
Yeah,
over Principal Tracy's head.
It's wild. I'm not sure this is carrying well in RCTV, but
Yeah. So if you haven't seen it, find the video, but I saw Principal Tracy a little bit after the
now
event.
we have to
and
put
he was
this in the record for OML. I don't know how we're even going to do
still a little bit shook from the event too, so.
Well,
I'll send it here and I'll project it there.
Trial.
How's that?
The practice run actually knocked the chair over, or
I
hit the
didn't
chair.
hear that.
I was told.
I didn't hear that.
Make sure
I do have to say that everyone who I spoke with about the presentation was made to make a clear tie between the BMX flip and anti-bullying. Principal Tracy, after that, I think wasn't able to make much of a connection. I think he was still a little bit rattled from that. So, but those are 2 fun things. So four quick updates in no particular order here. First, I know that we've given several updates on the RMHS track and field. As many of you know, that I shared that we're up and running, and it was really exciting to have so many of our athletic teams here at RMHS and also so many of our community partners and athletic teams in Townsend using the track. Looks awesome. We did have to shut down the track today for paint for the last sort of phase, which was to stripe the track. So I know it's a major inconvenience to have the field sort of offline today. The painting will be finished up tomorrow morning, and then activities can resume tomorrow night. So again, I know it's another frustration to have the field and track off the grid for 24 to 48 hours. But again, this is sort of the last major piece that would take the track and field off the grid. The last update waiting on the facility is the scoreboard, which are still waiting for a more solidified timeline. Second update is around the special education program review. So just an on timelines. Our Dr. Stiles and Allison Wright have been meeting with, have met with our program staff, have also met with our program family starting over the past couple days, and we'll give an overview of the program reviews at our next school committee meeting. So just wanted to give an update sort of on timeline on that process as well. Update on MSBA. So a few members of our team met with MSBA this past week for a conversation around enrollment. I think that we left the meeting encouraged by the idea that we felt MSBA seemed receptive to the idea of some of the other space needs that we were trying to resolve as a part of this process. While it's a kill and build, also some of the space concerns around modulars, some of the space concerns around or programmatic concerns with RISE, some of the additional needs for us to better support Tier 2 supports. And it seemed like there was an appetite and a willingness to consider that as part of the next phase of the process. Also like to share that they also seem receptive to the idea that some of the new growth on the town side, maybe some new developments, while in our enrollment questionnaire, it was really built off of building permits. We were also able to flag some of maybe potential building developments down the line that would have an impact on our enrollment as well. So just like to share with the community that we felt that MSBA was very receptive to sort of the holistic needs of our community, and looking forward to having that be a part of the conversation as we move forward. As a next step, we will submit some sort of additional information that can help them to shape sort of some of their enrollment forecasts. Last one, so you see sitting in front of us, Dr. King is a familiar face back in front of us. I shared a couple of weeks ago back with the both RISE staff and RISE family that Dr. King would be filling in as the interim director of RISE to fill in for the vacant position as the RISE director. So a couple of pieces of that. First, Dr. King is going to take on the director component of the role, and then Ms. Alana Schoen, who is a veteran team chair of the district, most recently has been handling a lot of our out-of-district caseloads, will be taking on the team chair side of the work. So Dr. King has had a couple of weeks under her belt. If you're not familiar with Dr. King, I don't know where you've been, but Dr. King has, after 11 awesome years of instructional leadership, operational leadership, her leadership at Wood End, she retired from the district, has been now more engaged over the past couple of weeks and months in supporting developing teachers, particularly UMass Lowell. We feel incredibly lucky that at a time of need and transition in our program, that Dr. King was willing to step into the interim role. I would say it's more than just a willingness. Dr. King has come in just with enthusiasm, with excitement about the program. A lot of times when you're trying to fill in an interim role, you are looking for stabilizing a program. And I think we know that bringing in Dr. King, she's shaking her head there, that while we may get stabilization, we're also going to get someone who's going to really move our program forward. So I think our team thinks really highly of Dr. King and her leadership, and just feels so fortunate that at a time of transition to have a leader of her caliber and her experience stepping into our program. We've heard a lot of excitement from staff thus far, and from families, and also from our littlest ones about Dr. King. You'll have a chance to hear from her tonight about how she's seeing her entry. So just like to formally welcome back Dr. King to the fold, and we are very fortunate and excited to have you back. And that's a one-year appointment to the end of June of 2023.
Great, thank you. And we will go to liaison reports. Sarah.
Just one quick one. The RCTV board met last week. I think I've lost track of time, on 9/20. And we got a quick recap on summer programming, starting to have a better turnout than we had during COVID. So kids are back and interested in enrolling. So looking at capacity, already thinking ahead to next summer. Anna Cuevas from RCTV, but also of RMHS, gave a little bit of an update on the classes that she's leading this year. Really excited. I think they've rolled out or piloting a TA system, so they have a couple teaching assistants as well, and looking at how we could expand that as well. The next meeting is later this month, October 27th. It's an ice cream social. Come on down if you're hungry. It's in person, and they're a really fun board, so maybe don't come, because then I won't have my position anymore.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Chuck.
So due to traffic concerns, I wasn't able to attend last week, the Coalition's recovery event, but I think based on, thank you to Chris Haley for doing a YouTube video of that. And it's really was a very nice event on the Common. I don't know if others may have been there, but I wasn't there, but that went very well. The other thing I just wanted to point out was, I meant to mention at last meeting, the event, the track naming event will occur on Veterans Day. Mr. Croft was already planning to speak at the Vietnam Wall's going to be here then, and he was going to ask to speak at that event, so it was better for his schedule to do it at that time. So more to come on that, but they're lining up some speakers and stuff for that.
Erin?
So I unfortunately missed the first CPAC meeting due to a family emergency, but I heard that they had a good attendance and the meeting went well, and there's a lot of enthusiasm for starting up the new year. The next CPAC meeting is October 18th. It's a Tuesday night at 7 p.m. and that will be hybrid, so both in person and there's a Zoom link to make it more convenient for people. And they are still looking for more volunteers if anyone is looking to get more involved in CPAC. And PAIR is meeting next on October 19th at 6 p.m. at the library.
Great. Tom?
So we had the financial forum back on September 21st. That was for everybody, select board, ourselves, and finance committee. I think we tried to cull like 5 boards together at that point in time. The permanent building committee was there, the Killam building committee was there. Yeah, it was like crazy how many boards had to release each other after that point in time. But the coverage was, there's a municipal finance presentation that was very detailed and showed how to do the process. And I came out of it saying we're doing it the right way, in a conservative way, and doing the right things. So that was impressive and good to see. We had 2 school-related presentations. We presented on Killam, which we've already presented here. Nothing new for this body, but just so you know that the finance committee saw that and select board saw that as well. And then Ms. Baton presented on the school budget process and how that's going to be built up as well. And then they kind of finalized, Fidel, broke the news publicly, I suppose, about Walgreens, that there's a bid out, that they put a request for bid out. It's been discussed in the select board a couple different times, but the request for bid did come back to sell that building to the town for $7 million, with $2 million coming back to us, so net of $5 million. And some preliminary, very, very, very preliminary designs to build it into a potential senior center for another $7.2 million. So all in about $12.3 million is the potential ask. There is a warrant article for the November town meeting for that as well. And I understand various different other boards and committees have already started discussing that. Recalc has, Council on Aging has, et cetera. So there's still a lot of foot in that place, but there's some movement there. The other thing is we have our hopefully or nearly our final RAC meeting. We'll probably have to get together to vote on minutes and then have another meeting to vote on minutes. But next Wednesday, the last substantial related conversation points for that are going to be essentially water and sewer, and then premium pay. So we're finalizing the premium pay model with input from the town and schools, and there's a couple, 3, 4, 5 different smaller asks as well that we'll have some final discussions on. So that probably will be the last major RAC meeting with the last recommendations to the select board.
Thank you. Carla?
There was a permanent building committee meeting on Monday, and they discussed the senior center site, and Fidel presented the 3 options of the putting an addition on the existing senior center, the Walgreens site, and a new facility right near the Burbank Y area.
Simon's Way, yeah.
Simon's Way. So that was about it. There was a lot of discussion as to the ease in having a building already built, that you weren't, digging into the ground and finding unexpected things, so.
I'll just share one brief select board update, really just about formalizing something that was, more or less a done deal already, but they did close the warrant for November town meeting. So the Killam feasibility study is Article 7 on the warrant. So we are official on moving forward to town meeting with that ask. So, okay, so we're just 3 minutes behind, or 4 minutes behind, which seems like a miracle given our bumpy start since I kicked something I shouldn't have. And let us move to the personnel section. So we're gonna ask our new principals as well as Dr. King to give a brief entry update. And we will start with Ms. Rubino. What?
Sean, can you give just a tiny bit of context on this?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, it's okay.
Yeah,
We're laughing at
go ahead. Oh, I thought you said you wanted.
Oh, yeah, can I give just a tiny bit of context too? So, just like to thank all of our new leaders for coming up tonight to share a little bit about their entry. Just as a bit of context, as the community likely knows, what we ask of all of our new leaders transitioning to the district, myself and Dr. Hardy included, is to formalize an entry plan that just outlines to the community and makes explicit how you're planning about entering in the community. How do you get to know the community? How do you identify the strengths? How do you identify areas for opportunity? And how are you getting to know people and to document that? So I'd like to thank all of our new leaders who put together an entry plan, which is included in your packet tonight if you haven't seen it. And they also all did a welcome video that you may have seen too earlier this year to welcome their to the respective school communities. Tonight, I asked them to come tonight and to not put a PowerPoint together, because if we asked them to put a PowerPoint together, it would be an elaborate, really well done PowerPoint that would have taken a bit of time away from the work at hand right now of moving schools forward. So I asked them just to give a 5-minute overview of just, can they provide a little bit of some of the ways that they've approached their entry, and also what are some of the things that they've learned right away. So I'll leave it up to the committee whether you'd rather go one at a time and ask a few minutes of questions, or rather just move through each 5 minutes and ask questions at the end. But I'd like to give each of them a chance to share a little bit about their entry.
Is there a preference? Yeah, why don't we'll go through all 4 and then we'll hold any questions for the end.
Make a suggestion?
Go ahead.
Because people can't see her.
They're back up.
They're back up.
We're good. Yep, thank you. Good call out, but RCTV is back up, so we're good with the podium. All right, those were exactly the words I intended to say, so thank you for covering off on that. Ms. Rubino.
Good evening, everyone. I'm going to start with a little anecdote that I wrote. All summer long, I could not wait for the first day of school. The building felt empty without the halls alive with the sounds of students and educators. As the new principal and also a new Reading educator, the first day of school also brought with it feelings of anxiety and even a few butterflies, as the unknown often can. As the students arrived on the first day, greeting me with their hellos, a few anxious half smiles, and some high fives, everything began to fall into place. At the end of the first day, I remember saying to those who asked just how right everything felt. The Parker School community picked up right where they left off, opening their arms to their students and beginning a new year of learning. It was by far my favorite day. So I'm just going to go through some bullet points that I put together to talk about my entry plan. So over the summer, I spent a lot of time individually and in small groups meeting with Parker educators and families. I held a Popsicles with the Principal event to get to know students and families before the start of school. During these first 6 weeks of school, I've been meeting with students during advisory and lunches, visiting classrooms, and learning about after-school activities. I've started to collaborate with our curriculum leaders and coordinators in Reading. I've been meeting with families via PTO meetings and other events. I have interacted with the Reading community at the Fall Fair, and I enjoyed getting dunked numerous times by students and other community members. It was a lot of fun. I recently have started a principal-student council to understand the needs of students, and I am working with them to create a school community where they feel a strong sense of belonging. And our first order of business is to plan the first Spirit Week of the year. I've collaborated with the PTO, and we held our first Parker Family Fun Night last Friday night, and we had around 100 students in attendance and some families as well. I've maintained some Parker traditions, such as the Parker Leaders Kindness Kits, which was their first service project of the year, and it ended with the 8th grade Boston field trip, which is why I'm wearing the Reading t-shirt. The back, because they went on that trip today. And in a couple weeks, I am looking forward to spending 3 days with the 7th grade students and staff at Nature's Classroom, so that's going to be a lot of fun as well. So I have learned over this time that Parker is truly a special place, just like everyone told me. It is full of committed, passionate, motivated educators who want students to succeed and work every day to create a safe and supportive environment. I've engaged with families who want to partner with Parker to build and strengthen our school-to-home connections. And in my personal and probably slightly biased opinion, the best student body, filled with kind students that care about their community and try their personal best to create an inclusive school environment. So if you notice, I included our kind community and personal best in there, which is our core values. I have also begun to understand the needs of our school. So some of the things that I'm looking to do over the course of this year is strengthen our alignment with the Parker teaching teams in the Coolidge Middle School, dig into our current data to assess student needs and provide appropriate interventions, foster and continue to build connections with our Boston resident students, families, and Reading residents, ensure access to equitable learning opportunities for all students, and lead an instructional learning team to strengthen academic instructional practices. So thank you so much for having me. I'm so happy to be here, and I look forward to continuing to work in Reading and get to know the community of learners here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Gallegos.
Hello, my name is Alyssa Gallegos, and I am the Barrows principal, and I'm delighted to be here. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak tonight. Just wanted to review a little bit and update the community on my entry plan. Similar to the other principals, we built it in phases. So the first phase, and I started mid-July with COVID, so it was a rough start for me, but it was first just really getting to know the stakeholders and listening deeply to what people wanted me to know about the school. So I've met with parents, I've done formal listening sessions where really I was just listening, asking questions and taking down all their feedback that they had to share. I've met with all of the teachers, the staff in the building, students. I've just started, similar to Rochelle, that I've been meeting with the 5th grade. I intentionally chose my oldest students in the school to get to know them best, first, since I have the shortest amount of time, and also to hear about what they want to see in the school, what they love about the school, and I've just been learning more in that respect. I also had the popsicles for the playground. I feel like I'm standing on my toes. That's better. To get to know the families. And that was really one of the first places that I really felt that strong sense of community that Barrows does have. I went to shake a student's hand and I leaned down and all of a sudden I got and he hugged right around the waist, and I thought, oh gosh, this is the place that I need to be. And since then I've just continued to receive that warm welcome from the students, the staff, and the families, and it's been absolutely wonderful. It's a very special place. After the summer entry, first phase, I've entered the second one where I'm really getting to see how the teachers, our staff work together with students and parents collaboratively, looking at our new curriculums that we're bringing in. So it's a very comprehensive experience of just getting in the classrooms, being anywhere and everywhere, working with central office, working together with the principals, and learning from everyone to see how we do this good work that we do in Reading. I've learned as I met with PTO, we had a meeting with the executive board, and then we've had our first meeting, it was actually last night. What a strong and inclusive community Barrows wants to be and strives to be. We know that there's still work to do, and so we're having conversations about that so that we can make sure that we're meeting the needs of every single student. What I've learned from the staff is how professional and deeply committed they are to educating each student. They advocate for every single child. So we've had really emotional conversations about, what can they do for their students, each one specifically. So that care and commitment that I see on a daily basis is also going to drive future successes for our students. When I meet with the students every Friday, I always ask them, what do you love about Barrows? And, or what do you want changed? And they just really say, we love it here. And they haven't really given me a lot of feedback about what we can do differently, which is really special. And so I think a commitment that I've made to the community as I came in was to really uphold the traditions of our school. And so through our Barrows Picnic, we're getting ready for the Monster Mash, the strong PTO. We're just working together to carry that out while we bring in that rigor that the district wants. It seems like there is a strong sense of belonging. We know we need to do more work, but we're also now really looking at those new curriculums to bridge the gap from these last 3 years that have just been really strange throughout the whole state and the country that we're going to be addressing. So I really just what I've learned so far is what a strong community that we have, and I'm just really getting to know everyone, and I really appreciate just the community. And what I think is neat is we're probably going to be sharing similar messages, is that as a parent in Reading, you really see this depth in every single school. And I'll share just one other anecdote. When I was interviewing for the position, one of the parents said to me, this is the best school in the town. And I thought, gosh, my kids don't go here. And so I thought, wait a minute, I've been so happy and blessed with where my kids have been. But you just see that depth that I think because we work together so collaboratively across all schools, from our rise all the way up to our high school, that we're really building that sense of belonging together as a community, not just within each school. So thank you for your time.
Thank you. Thank you. Ms. Schwartz.
We're here tonight, so I don't have to change the microphone too much. Good evening, everyone. I'm Nicole Schwartz. I'm the new principal at Woodend. I feel really fortunate to have been hired sort of early maybe late in the spring, early in the spring, where I really had an opportunity to spend a lot of time learning about students and staff at Woodend before I assumed my role here starting July 1st. However, that also made waiting for July 1st really difficult. But I was able to participate in some whole school events like Field Day, the Daily Happening, sitting in on classroom lessons, and learning from Dr. King, who's actually here tonight. So it's been really exciting for me. The quiet summer months led to a lot of excitement and anticipation. I was able to catch up on PTO notes and school council minutes, reading IEPs and 504s. I even got to debut my cartwheeling skills, which multiple students have told me that they can show me how to do that better, so I'm learning. The last several months, I really worked hard to gain a deeper understanding of the instructional side and the cultural side of the school community. And to do that, I've done a variety of things. So meeting with dozens of caregivers and families to get a sense of what the community is looking for in a leader. I've met with staff members individually and in small groups to hear what their experience at Woodend is like and what it is that they're looking for in a leader. I've collaborated with curriculum leaders in a variety of settings. I, too, attended Popsicles with the principal for new incoming students. I brought my family to our beginning of the year pizza event, which was really fun. And I did not go into the dunk tank, but I did participate in the Understanding Disabilities Town Fair and brought my 2 kiddos with me to do that. I participated in the first official PTO meeting just last week. And my favorite part of this job has been able to engage with students in not only the classroom setting, but also in the social setting. So I've joined classroom discussions and lessons. I've learned that I should not slide down the fire pole because it is for sure going to burn your hands. I've learned the hard way. I've also learned that swings and gliders are really popular playground toys. The jungle gym structure on the upper playground is really hard to hang from as an adult. That I can actually fit inside a closed tube slide and not get stuck. That air tag is actually a real game that 3rd graders play and has very complicated rules. That the hand games my 7-year-old has taught me at home have come in handy in indoor recess on inclement weather days, and that flag football is a really, it's a 4th grade favorite, so. Additionally, today we brought a new tradition to Woodend, which has been really exciting, that I called Think About It Thursday. It'll be a new weekly tradition where teachers and their students hear a brief song clip or a famous quote or a trivia question or a line from a children's book. And I read this over the loudspeaker, and the 5th caller to the office, so Ms. Finnegan was really helpful today, wins a prize from the Wildcat Wagon, and my instructional leadership team helped me put together the wagon, and everyone pitched in and bought prizes. I did dress up today as Pippi Longstocking, so if there are pictures all over Instagram on my teacher accounts, it is true, it was me. I dressed up as Pippi Longstocking, arrived at the door of the winning classroom teacher, and she chose a prize off the prize wagon, and it was a pretty big hit. So those are some fun things I've done within the school community. Reflecting on all of this, I'm really starting to get a sense of what shapes the school, and I just want to share a few things that I haven't mentioned that I've learned about Woodend, which is that we have a really solid school-wide system that supports students' social emotional needs through our check-in, check-out system, our mentoring system, and the pause system. That we have an extremely dedicated PTO willing to support our school in any way that they can, and that my staff is an incredibly dedicated set of professionals. There's sort of this collective understanding amongst the staff that regardless of your role, you're here to support every student in our building, and I've seen teachers step in multiple ways to support everyone in the building. And it's really pretty remarkable. So with all these really great things that I've seen, like I know that there's work that we need to do to move forward. So some of the work that we'll be doing this year and moving in is really digging into our current data, looking at grade level data, benchmark data, new curriculum data to unpack the story that it tells, to ensure we're making some strategic moves, providing academic interventions as necessary for our students to support their learning. We're going to be piloting a new and updated student support team system this year process that will help us identify and intervene early with any of our students who may be struggling in our classrooms and provide some equitable learning opportunities. Working really hard with my new school adjustment counselor this year, as well as the others who are working in the METCO program to build strong relationships with the Boston resident students, as well as our Reading resident students and their families, and really continuing to build on that strong team mentality that I feel that Wood End really has. So with that, I'm really excited to be here. I feel super fortunate to have found Wood End and to land here, and I really have felt a sense of joy and belonging in the new school community. So thanks.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
And Dr.
And
King.
Sean, your daughter's class actually won.
I know. I did see it on Instagram.
You saw it on Instagram already?
Yeah.
My red wig was a big hit.
Yeah. Dr. King.
Thanks for having me back. It was a tough decision. Do I stay in the United Kingdom or come back to Reading? I came back to Reading. I have to tell you, I'm really excited to be here and be part of the RISE community for this year. Everyone's been very welcoming, and although it was a very quick retirement, I'm thrilled to be part of the team. So my goal, obviously up front, is to be a very visible, supportive presence at RISE, both for students, staff, and families. I didn't get into the amazing entry plans that these lovely ladies did because I've had like 8 days to prepare. So, but I can tell you, I have visited every classroom at RISE, both at the high school, at Wood End, and at Killam at least 2 or 3 times. So the students have all met me. I've met all of them. Most of the kids I've already known from either Wood End or from being over at the high school. I've been able to meet with all the staff, the teachers, the paras, the related service providers to understand areas of strength as well as, sorry, Nicole, as well as some areas of need and what their hopes are for this school year, which has been very helpful. I've communicated with staff and families during in-person meetings and phone calls, emails. I've had lots of meetings since last week. I will be, once I get my new Samore account up and running, be sending that out to families as well. So I'll be keeping people updated as to what's happening. I've met and established a scope and sequence for professional development for all staff that's going to take place twice monthly for the remainder of the school year. So I'm kind of shifting the way the staff meetings are used at RISE, and we're going to be using that for professional development. I'm actually working with a friend of mine, Julia Hendricks. Many of you know as the former principal of Birch Meadow, and we have put together quite an extensive professional development series for staff, and it's all staff, paraeducators, teachers, to work with us on. The focus is going to be establishing values and norms for our work at RISE. We're also going to be practicing the skills required to become a professional learning community and solving problems of practice using the knowledge and experience of the amazing teachers at RISE. The goal is also to help develop some of the emotional resilience in our educators. As we all know, what the past 3 years have looked like, it's been very challenging, but to develop them as a professional learning community. So we're going to be using some of the work from Elena Aguilar to help in this process for the year. I'm also going to be establishing some new systems of practice. So we're shifting the focus of the building-based leadership team to implement a more consistent and research-based child study or student support team process to meet the needs of all learners and to really kind of identify the individual needs of our students without over-identifying them for special education. That's going to include, implementing a new referral process, professional collaboration around identifying strategies, training staff on the implementation, and data collection. We're also going to refine our PBIS practices, so the positive behavior interventions and supports that we use in our schools for students to promote a continued positive, predictable, and safe learning environment for our students and for our staff. As we know, our students are coming in with very different needs these days, and I think it's important to keep our educators up to date on the most effective practices to meet those needs, and that's going to involve continuous training. Another goal is to welcome families back into RISE classrooms. So it's been a while since we've been able to have families in, but to invite families back in to, become mystery readers or help with some of the center activities, to be part of their children's learning day. And then also to continue to build partnerships with other preschool programs in the area, as well as the ongoing collaboration that we do with early intervention. So it's going to be an interesting year, but thanks for having me back, and I look forward to it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any questions for any of our new and returning leaders? Go ahead, Tom.
I'll go with not so much a question, but an encouragement. And you can speak to it if you want to, but I think last year we heard a lot from other newer administrators coming in about some of the successes, some of the strengths, but also some of the areas for improvement. And you see in our budget for this year that those are already reflected. So your voice is critically important for what's necessary to improve your specific community. And please, as you do that, make sure it comes back, right? You'll do it through this team as necessary, and we'll see it through the budget and whatnot as we go through. But, the Academic Support Center we talked about earlier in this meeting is because of that conversation. And I just want to continue to encourage that you look for those things too in your specific schools and your specific use cases. There are a lot of wonderful things in all your schools, you outlined that, but there are also always areas for continuous improvement. So what can we do to support you in that regard from a budget perspective or anything else along those lines? So we're here to support you in that regard. To just ask, right? If you don't ask, you can't get anything, but if you have something that you need, bring it to the table and let's see what we can do to support you in that regard.
I'll just add, leadership transitions can be anxiety inducing for communities and families and teachers and so forth. And so all the feedback that I've received so far about, really all of your buildings has been that things feel settled and people feel very sort of enthusiastic about what's happening. So, keep it up. Thank you for joining us and rejoining us. And I would echo Tom's point as well. I know that you won't, but don't be strangers to the school committee. We need to hear those. We need to hear those needs that are arising in your buildings and make sure that we're carving out space for them. So thank you. Anything else?
As we close, I'd just like to thank all of our new leaders too. I think Sean just shared that leadership transitions are hard and challenging and complex. I know that I know our community appreciates how you've entered with humility, you've entered by listening, and I think you've entered with a real deep commitment to our communities and to our students. So I'm really encouraged. I think the community's really encouraged with how you've all entered this far. So just like to, I don't share that privately, but thank you publicly for the great work you've done in entering in and setting a strong foundation for your leadership for the years to come, or year to come in one case. But thank you.
All right, very good. Okay, so we will move on to the old business section. So the order of business here is around approving the RMHS handbook. So just, the backstory, just to refresh everybody's memory, and then for anybody watching at home, probably in late August, I think, we started to review a version of the high school handbook. It felt a little bit premature to be making decisions and updates at that point, given that we were also in the process of developing a district-wide handbook for a lot of areas where there's sort of a consistent view across the buildings. So given that we approved the district-wide handbook in the last meeting, the high school, school council, and the administration have now revised the high school handbook to remove the pieces that are covered by the district handbook, incorporate the other edits that they've been working on. So this has now been reviewed, approved by the administration, by the school council at the high school, and is ready for us to take a vote this evening. So before we have any sort of discussion, we'll take a motion and then we'll open discussion.
I move to approve the RMHS handbook.
Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Tom, and I will open up for discussion. You good, or you just don't want to go first?
I'm trying not to go first.
Go ahead.
That's what it is.
No, go ahead.
So I guess I've been the one who's been kind of pushing this for a while, and I just wanted to, express my appreciation, right? It's not a finished product in any way, shape, or form. I think we'll all agree on that for the most part, but the work that's been taking place behind the scenes, Dr. Stice, I think, has been huge in that process. with our legal counsel as well to go through and, take the district one but then pull some of those things back out of this handbook as well. So there's not duplication. I'm hearing positive feedback from principals, not just Mr. Tracy, but other principals as well about the centralized process that's there too. So that's good to hear. This has been a work in progress and it's a huge step in the right direction. I think Dr. M, you said we've made 2 or 3 first downs. I think we've made a little bit more than that. I think it's been a pretty big change and improvement to catch up with things. There's still work to be done, and I'm sure the school council will continue to work through with Mr. Tracy and the rest of the administration on some of those other adjustments, but at least now they have a solid footing and a solid foundation that's aligned with the state laws and regulations and whatnot, and our policies for that matter. So I just want to thank all that's been involved in that process. And I know it was a sprint. Basically, you had 5 weeks to get to this point, for things that probably hadn't been updated in 4 to 12 years. So I just want to, again, express my appreciation for that. So.
Well said. We will be in a much better place at the end of this year for any future updates. So well said. Any other comments before we take a vote? Okay, all in favor? All opposed? And it carries 6-0. Okay, so moving on to new business. The MASC joint conference is coming up in early November. One of the elements of the conference is the MASC members can propose and then ultimately vote on a series of resolutions. We've been invited, as all school committees, who are members of MASC have been, we've been invited to submit a delegate to vote on our behalf for those resolutions. So the first question is whether anybody plans to or is able to and willing to attend at least this portion of the conference. It's going to be Wednesday afternoon, November 2nd is I think it's called the Resolutions Clinic. And then the delegate assembly are the pieces where these resolutions will be introduced and then discussed. And just for a quick bit of context around the resolutions, they're essentially they're sort of the MASC equivalent of instructional motions. They're non-binding sort of advocacy points for the legislature. So the ones that are sort of proposed this time around include one about the rights of transgender students, one about the board makeup for the Board of Elementary and Secondary Education. There's one about expanding the ability for districts to save in their special education reserve funds. And they're really just, again, advocacy positions to ask the legislature to take up these issues. I think there were maybe 6 in total. They're up for consideration. We don't have to send a delegate. If nobody's able to attend the conference, we won't submit one. But if anybody is able and planning to be there on the afternoon of November 2nd, we can identify a delegate. If we do identify a delegate, I'm going to put the resolutions on our agenda for the 20th so that we can discuss and take a vote as a committee and send the delegate with guidance for how the committee would prefer to vote. So I'll open it up for anybody who's got particular interest or availability. I know it's difficult on a Wednesday afternoon in a work week for all of us, but I don't know if anybody is itching to go to Hyannis, I think it is.
Yes.
Yeah. Isn't Hyannis? I mean, the topics sound fascinating, but Hyannis.
If it were Thursday, I would say I will be there anyway.
Yeah.
So yes, but since it's Wednesday,
yeah,
that would be an additional commitment. So
yeah. Not looking to you, it's no pressure. I mean, Chuck, you probably know the history in this. I'm sure there are many years when we haven't, been able to send a delegate, right? So, it's the middle of the week in Hyannis. So I think we all, I think we understand this may be one of those years. So, okay. All right. Well, we do have until, I believe it's the 20th to submit a delegate. So if anybody, quits their job in a blaze of glory and is looking for something to do, reach out. I think I can appoint a delegate, and then we'll just put this topic on the agenda for the 20th for the resolutions. But I don't anticipate that will be the case.
Can you send us I didn't
Yeah, we can send you the resolutions. Sure. Yeah. Yep. Okay.
Sean, just say, if anyone's interested in the resolutions, they're also on MASC's website as well, too, so the public can also, just for anyone watching who wants to see them, they're also publicly accessible.
That's right. Okay. All right, so the next order of business is our school year 2022 MCAS results overview and discussion, and for that, I will turn it to Dr. Hardy.
Do we have slides that go up?
Come in.
Tom's, yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you, everyone. I'll get started, Tom, while you get that going, if that's okay.
Sorry, it's not working.
Yeah, so,
Oh, wait a minute. Paging Chris Pedro.
Paging Chris.
Got the code that's there. Oh, yeah. Chris, I wonder if we kicked out of the meeting and back in, if the share key changed.
It's the.
Is that a 2 or is that a 3?
It's not presenting necessarily, but I'm moderating a forum. Dr. M is
Oh,
one
yeah,
of
it
the
did.
members, along with the superintendent from Holyoke and whatever. It's the equity planning for equity focused leaders. It really is supposed to be entry planning or equity planning for entry.
okay.
So it's just a panel
Perfect.
discussion.
Thank you.
Cool.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, Dr. Hardy.
Into that.
Got it.
He asked me back in
Getting it.
April or May or something like that.
All right.
Somebody said, okay, sorry.
Excellent. So as I launch in tonight, I just want to start with a big thank you to our data specialist, Liam Lascalzo. He was instrumental starting to work with the central office team about a month ago as we got the first wave of EBCAS results to help us analyze and think about how we can visually best show our student performance and growth this year. And so a lot of the work that you're seeing tonight, he created and contributed to. So just want to give him a big shout out. All right. Yep, that might, thank you. I want to start tonight by just quickly setting the context. I think it's always important when we discuss a student assessment to understand the context that it sits in. In the spring of 2022, can you raise the volume a little bit? Of my voice? Yes. Okay. All right, I'm gonna try to bring out my teacher voice. Maybe pull the mic closer, I don't know. We had about 2,300 students participate in at least one of the MCAS assessments. And I just want to remind you that 2022 was the first year in quite a few years that we administered the full range of tests to our students in grades 3 through 8, and then at the high school level in science and ELA and math. And so that's just important to remember. The most important thing I'll pull out here from that detail is that when we talk about comparing years of MCAS, we really can't look at comparing the past few years because there were differences in how that test was administered. And so really we're looking back from 2019 is the last time that we're looking at a similar testing environment, which by the way, our 10th graders were in 7th grade then. So a number of years have passed. The other piece that's important to remember for the context is just the learning environment that our students have been coming to school in for the past couple of years. And I reviewed this with you last year when we talked about the 2021 results, just really understanding that our student experiences have been deeply impacted by the pandemic and the change to learning environments for them. This is important because as we interpret, analyze, and most importantly, figure out next steps, we need to understand what these results are situated in so that we know how to impact them and how to change and make improvements. And as we look through the results, we really need to look for evidence that our students are getting back on track and look for spots where they're not getting back on track, and we need to apply strategies to ensure that they are. I'm going to start by just giving you some trends across the state and in Reading. I want to just orient you quickly to this graphic because you're going to see this type of chart on the next 6 slides. What we have here are 3 different columns, and the reason that they're all here is, again, because of that slide we were just looking at. The tests over the past few years have been very different. One column we're looking at, we're comparing 2019 to the 2021 results. So that basically says last year, how did our students do when we looked back to 2019? The second column indicates the change that are in our student achievement from last year to this year. And then the final column indicates the change in our student achievement from 2019 to 2022. in some ways, that is one of the more important columns because those are two tests that are somewhat comparable. But really, it takes all three columns to understand the achievement of our students and their growth this year. Really quickly, across the state in ELA, the state saw another drop in ELA. We saw somewhat of a drop in 2021 and really kind of saw another hit to the ELA scores. When we look at the trends across the state in math, this is where we start to see some bright lights. We saw either some recovery for students or slowing decline for students. And then across the state, there was just a small recovery in science. So that's just to set the context for you. So now we're going to just take a peek at how the Reading scores compare to what we just looked at for the state. Again, orienting you here, the state column is on the left, and then in red is the Reading score to show you the change here in Reading. When we look at our ELA scores, we see that we continue to show the impact of the pandemic on our student scores. And similar to the state, we continue to see declines. Fortunately, our declines were not as sharply noted as in the state data. And we see the biggest impact of these pandemic years kind of exactly where we thought we would see them, in the early grades on literacy. I would like to note too, as we look at our grade 10, we saw some really nice success in 2021. We didn't see the exact same level of success last year, but overall our 10th graders are still performing better than across the state. In math, we, similar to the state, saw a rebound. We start to see our students recovering, and in fact even saw a stronger rebound here than across the state. We definitely still have more progress to get to our pre-pandemic scores. In 10th grade, we did see a small dip, but it was not as significant as the dip across the state. And then finally, in science, we actually see some really encouraging recovery for our students. If you look at that final column, you can see that we're close to our pre-pandemic achievement levels for our students. I want to just pause there before I head into the next section. I know I went through those quickly, and those are really just meant to orient us and give us a context, but I wanted to see if there were any clarifying questions before I launch into some more detailed analysis of our student achievement and growth.
So the English scores are particularly concerning here, especially in the 3rd and 4th grade. I'm wondering, do you see what we've already put in place this year with the new curriculum being something that we hope will improve those scores when we're looking at these numbers next year?
So when we're putting a new program in place, like a high quality curriculum material, the reason is because we know, we're confident that we're going to show gains for our students. Will we see those gains in 1 year? I would love to say yes, absolutely we will. I'm confident in what we're implementing right now, and I'll talk with you a little bit at the end about what that looks like in regards to how we're going to move this work ahead. There is sometimes a lull, like when you implement a new program, you do not always see results in that first year because that first implementation year does carry some unique barriers for teachers. Like just for example, one quick thing is when teachers go through something the first time, they teach it a little bit slower because they're learning it as they go. And so sometimes they don't get all the way to the end of the curriculum in a first year. So little things like that can implement, can alternate, I'm sorry. They can impact the implementation in the first year, which you don't always see those results right away. But it certainly, I think, makes the case in point as to why we felt so strongly that we needed to make sure we have high quality materials in our teachers' hand and outstanding professional development so that the instruction in front of our students is impacting this. What we had in place before clearly was not supporting our students as they recovered from the pandemic.
Can I ask one more question?
Sure, yeah.
The iReady assessments, is that just math or is that also, it's just math?
I'll chat a little bit about this at the end too,
Okay.
but it's actually math and ELA in our middle
Okay.
schools. Yeah, great question.
I think, Erin, your first question brings up a concern that I've been having, which is a year from now, it's going to be difficult for us to evaluate the impact of ARC versus the impact of continued recovery, right? So, you know, I think your points are spot on, and it's going to be hard to sort of tease out what had what impact a year from now. So, Sarah.
As long as our students improve, I will be willing to take
We'll
credit for
take
either.
whatever the reason for it is. Yeah, exactly. Sarah.
I mean, something that's interesting to note, I think to that point, Sean, I think, yes, the impact of COVID on learning loss is a real thing, but if you look at the cohort of kids pre-pandemic, so if you look at the third grade scores in 2019 and compare it to the sixth grade scores, they're at about the same level. So you can do that across any of the groups and say that their scores are pretty similar. So I do think there is learning loss, but I think it just speaks to that we just need to raise our standards for what we're doing across the curriculum. I don't think we can blame everything on the pandemic.
Good, Tom.
Just to peel the onion a little bit more on this topic. You know, as you look at the third graders in this year, they were first graders when the pandemic hit, right? So they'd gone through half of their first grade year, a little bit more than half of their first grade year, and they missed, for all intents and purposes, that last quarter to half of their first grade year. That's a foundational year.
They were in kindergarten.
Right?
Sure.
Third graders were in kindergarten.
They.
Oh, the third graders that tested.
Third
here.
graders that tested
Yeah,
here.
sorry,
The
sorry.
current third,
Yeah.
now that's my next point.
Yeah.
The current third graders were in kindergarten when this hit, and they had a very disjointed first grade year in addition to that. So if I'm forecasting, they're getting ARC for the first time this year, but if I'm forecasting, we're gonna see some tougher years next year for third grade as well. If we can close that gap this year, great, but if we're gonna really hit hard, I think that year is probably a big, heavy focus for us to look at this year to see what we can do to help close that gap so we don't go down again in third grade. The second thing I think is Sarah's point is, and I know this is addressed later in the presentation, but we really need to start looking at this from a cohort perspective. And look at the cohort across time as opposed to a third grade versus third grade versus third grade. It's different students in each of the third grades. So this -12, you know, is one number, but they've never been scored before. The -6 is another interesting number, but what is it versus their number the year before? And so thinking about that, and I know that's the plan going forward, but the more we can present on a cohort basis, the better we'll actually be able to look at similar student groups and their particular growth or not growth.
That's terrific feedback and something I strongly agree with. I think that that's a huge drawback to the way we look at the data this way, because you're comparing different groups of kids and across, you know, even though it's third grade, it's a different assessment. So again, it's a snapshot. It's a one way of looking at the data out of many different ways. But as you previewed for us, using a cohort model going forward is going to give us a lot more information. This year will be a baseline year for us, 2022, that will allow us to track kids as they go forward and see how they change as they go from grade to grade.
One more question?
Sure.
One more question as a clarification question before we move forward. It's the science for 10th grade. I guess, I think this is one thing I've learned recently, obviously having kids taking it, but it's really 9th grade biology that's taking this test for the most part.
It is, yeah.
But in 10th grade, we don't have physics. So is it physics or is it chemistry that's the 10th grade test?
Actually, both are offered.
So it's physics, chemistry, or biology, whatever
Correct.
the kids are taking, they take a test in that and pass the provision. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, one thing I should have mentioned here too is 2022 was the first year where the Next Generation Science MCAS was administered. So I can tell you a little bit more about that as we go. All right, let's dive in a little deeper. Okay. So this is just like a really nice visual of our achievement levels. So I want to just remind you that there are kind of 4 ways that we measure student achievement. We look at students that are exceeding expectations, meeting expectations, approaching, and then not meeting. And so the colors here are indicated. Dark green is where we want to see our students, all the way down to that darker red is the not meeting. And so this is a nice visual. The bars on top are broken out by grades 3 through 8. And then down at the bottom below that dotted line, you see that we have the 3 to 8 summarized and then the grade 10 below that. There is some variability by grade. And what I want to point out, there's just a few grades that caught our eye that we're taking a look at. Our 4th grade, we noticed that we had less students in our green zone, which was where we really want to see our students meeting or exceeding. But 6th grade, we had quite a really great group of kids that were in that exceeding, which really stands out for us. When we look at that overall achievement in math for grades 3 through 8, again, that 6th grade group has more students that are meeting or exceeding. So it's a very strong cohort of students. And 3rd grade, we saw that there were less students meeting or exceeding. And our 8th graders actually had some good results there too, with more kids that were exceeding. So just to show you now what those 3rd through 8th grade scores look like when we compare them to the state. This is just kind of the more traditional bar graph that you would see. To orient you to this, the gray bars represent the state, and then the red are Reading, of course. And going across the bottom are the achievement levels. So the E and M represent exceeding and meeting, and those are the areas where we want to see that red bar as high as possible. And then as we look at the partially meeting or not meeting, that's where we want to see the red bar lower. So as you see, Reading achievement, we're performing at much better levels than the state, which is what we would expect and want for our district. Let's see here. Here we go. Here are 10th grade. Oh, actually, did I miss one? Here are our 10th grade. Again, you can see that our students are performing much higher than the state. One thing that I really like to see on this slide too, especially in math, is the number of students that we have in the exceeding, much higher than the state level.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, go ahead.
Can I ask a question? Or do you?
Go ahead.
Am I correct that all of the students who are either approaching or not meeting have to retake the test?
So it would be the students that are not meeting, yep, and I'll get into that in a second.
Just not meeting, approaching, they don't have to retake it?
Correct. Yep.
Okay.
There will be a shift in the graduation requirement, but we have 2 more years on the current graduation requirement.
Okay.
I think you got the older presentation here.
Oh. So what we're saying is we don't know if we have the power, we made a couple updates and slides earlier, and we just don't know if they're reflected in here too.
Yeah, like this one's not in there.
Chris, is there any way we can show Dr. Hardy's screen? If not, we just added a couple of slides that we think would add some more context here.
She can share the same way. You just need that code.
Just need the code.
Oh, okay.
On the meeting now.
Sorry.
She doesn't need to be on the meeting. She just opens the Zoom app as long as she's on. So just open the Zoom app, and then the icon, I think in the upper right, will say share content.
Sorry, everyone.
I will walk the code to you because
You don't want to speak it out loud.
I don't want to speak it out loud.
There's nobody else on the call, but.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, they could be watching on YouTube and decide to jump in.
No fans tonight?
Nope.
I still had to stop my screen. I probably had to stop sharing first.
So try it again. Just go back to the Zoom app. Go to home.
Sean, you're right there, proficient at this by now.
And then share screen. That's what we're doing.
There we go.
Awesome. Because we added some good slides, and I don't want to miss out getting to share them with you. Okay, so here we were. So achievement broken down compared to the state. So this is, again, our grades 3 through 8. And what I wanted to show you, so here we're seeing the visual kind of 3 and for 3 to 8. And I wanted to just break it down for you by grade level. And I want to just remind you, when we were looking at those bar graphs, and we noted that there were some grade levels there that either weren't achieving as high, or they had some really nice achievement. I want to just put that into context with the state. And the reason that it's sometimes interesting to look at the state data is because that tells you in general, like, how the test fell across the aggregate across the whole state. Like, was it a harder assessment? And so when we look at, like, did the state have stronger growth or did we have stronger growth, it just puts our results into perspective a little bit. So if you look at that 4th grade that we had noted on ELA that had less exceeding and meeting, you notice that the state has a similar trend. So that we kind of matched what the state was doing there. But in 6th grade, remember that those really strong 6th graders, the state trend did not match that. Our 6th graders exceeded and met in a place where the state kind of just stayed steady. So kudos to that group of 6th graders. As we look at the math scores, again, those 6th graders are still a little bit stronger than the state, but our 3rd graders that we saw were struggling a bit. That's not matched in the state. And again, our 8th graders who were, we had a lot of exceeding. The state actually struggled on that 8th grade test, so kudos to our 8th graders. All right, so here we are again looking at our 10th graders and looking at their achievement in ELA and math. So we did have a number of students who will have to retake the math and then the science, which we'll get to in the next slide. And we had no students that would need to retake the ELA, actually. One of the things that we did this year, as soon as we were reviewing the results, was to check in with the high school team in regards to their plan to support those students. And I think that we've put together a solid plan. I'll just give you a quick highlight, won't go into it now, and also let you know that part of our plan development is to think about the students who haven't taken the assessment yet and how we'll support them this year before they even take the assessment. That's one of the things that we're working out, a course that we'll be running during Flex Block. But we're going to be running some 8-session courses. For math, MCAS review, it will actually be run by our department head, Allison Williams. And then those students will have the opportunity to retake in November, and then again, an opportunity to retake in the spring. When we look at our science achievement, here we have our 5th grade, our 8th grade, and our 10th grade. Remembering that this was the first year for our next generation MCAS at the high school. And just to give you a little quick overview of why that matters and why we're even mentioning it, it's actually a redesign of the test, and it's a focus on the 2016 standards. And so it changes the test so that there's a focus on content and skills. And so it does make it difficult to compare to the legacy test. So we did have students that will need to retake this assessment. It's a little bit different with the science assessment because they have the opportunity to retake the biology one in February. So again, we'll run a course for those students, an 8-week course to help prep them for that. If they still need to retake it again after that, they'll have 3 options in the spring to take another retake. They could continue with biology, or they could take the intro to physics or the chemistry. Depends on what course they're in as a 10th grader. So obviously, in order to take an MCAS assessment, you have to have taken the course as well. And so that's what the high school will work. The counselors will work with students to determine what should be the best test for them to take. And this is just a little overview of how our science achievement levels versus the state. You can see in grades 5 to 8 that we really are doing a great job, that our science achievement is much higher than the state. This year, our high school struggled with the new assessment. As you can see, we're really level with the state, which is not where we expect our scores to be. I want to point out, though, we have more students in the exceeding, which is really great. Awesome. Okay. So another way that we measure, when people kind of say, well, how did we do on MCAS? Another thing that we look at is our student growth percentiles. And this is an opportunity for students to be compared to a cohort of students across the state. And that's why it starts in 4th grade, because it has to compare results from one year to the next. So it will look at a student's results in one grade, cohort them with a group of students who scored similarly, and then it looks at how those students landed in the next year. And based on that, gives them a percentage of growth rating. So 50% is right smack dab where you want to be. That's like the ideal spot. What I provided for you here is kind of the key as to where we look at growth, high, low, or medium growth. We think that this is a really promising result for us because we see here that with all of our students higher than 50, even some student groups on certain assessments in the 60s, this means our students are growing faster than their peers across the state. So that is encouraging. The SGP really allows us to see progress and growth over time, which is important as we look at these results and put them in context. So it shows us that we are making steps to getting our students back on track. I want to in particular highlight our ELA, 6th grade ELA, 63%, and our math for 7th grade, 60%. That puts them in that growth of range of high growth, so even above typical growth. Awesome. So as a reminder, most of our presentation really focuses on district level trends. We don't think that our district-wide presentation is the spot to dive into individual school performances, and each school principal will report out to their school community about their results. However, we always do think it's important to be transparent with the community in regards to how achievement and how student growth looks across our schools. We decided, though, that there's one metric that really kind of quantifies a way to look at how our schools are performing, and that is the accountability percentile. So what I have provided for you here is the accountability percentile for each of our schools. You can see that all of these really are kind of on the higher end in what we would want to see, but there definitely continues to be variability between our schools. And this is something that we continued to dive into. If you look on the left, you can see kind of the criteria and how these accountability percentiles are calculated. And so as we continue to look at this data, we will dive into those factors to determine which will be the biggest levers to bring our schools along. I think you'll see as I start to talk to you at the end about our next steps, that one of the things that is important to us, and I think you heard it even highlighted tonight from our new principals, is the idea of consistency in curriculum. And as we look at the programs that we have in place, the practices, the assessments, ensuring that there's a clear expectation for what will be consistent across schools, and that we're supporting our teachers to ensure that they're able to access those things. We have building leaders that are committed to that. So we'll talk a little bit more about that at the end. Okay. I'm going to pause right there before I dive into the next section, just to see, I know I just threw a lot at you, just to see if you have any questions about those slides.
Go ahead.
So I guess it's not a question so much as a statement or a hope.
Sure.
Right? We're looking at ourselves versus the state, which includes some quite disadvantaged communities in the total. And we should be higher than that, right? By all intents and purposes, and you've conveyed that pretty much as your expectation as you went. I'd like to start seeing us against more of a subset of schools and districts that meet or are similar to what we are. There was one slide, I think, that kind of showed a few different examples, or maybe I'm thinking of something, but more of a cohort of peer set of schools, whether that's budget peers, whether that's FinCom peers, whether that's, DART peers, whatever the case might be. Because, and then I'd love to know if private schools take MCAS. I don't really know if they do, but I'd love to love to be able to compete against that too if we could. But
They don't.
I know they don't, but I think it would be good for us to see that, because that's essentially our competition in many ways. When they leave RMHS, the competition is the kids at Lexington to Winchester and North Andover and whatnot. So how are we doing versus that competition would be one thing. The other thing I think is, there has been some positive growth and positive improvement. I love the growth numbers, right? I want to see them all in 60s, but I'm happy to see them in 50s at least. In the past couple of years, we've seen them in 30s and 40s, and so seeing them in 50s is a good thing. But we can't miss the fact that there are still 40, 45, 50% of our kids in some categories that are not meeting and exceeding. And I know you've already talked about some of the remediation plans there, but we just need to continue to focus really heavily on making sure that all those kids can be, brought up. And that's implicit and it's explicit in our equity statement as well. So it's already part of the DNA of this group as we go forward. But I don't want to miss that key point that some of these things are still showing some challenges. Obviously, there were COVID impacts. Obviously, there are other impacts, but the more we can do to continue to support those kids as well to raise them up. And you're going to get through some of the subsections here in a second that shows some of that other stuff as well.
Go ahead.
I think we'll get into this more, as we talk about benchmarks and the district improvement plan, but, again, I was along the same line of thinking, how are we comparing ourselves to what is our goal? And if you look at the top districts in the state, the top schools, the Boston Latins, the Lexingtons, Weston, all of those, their scores are in the 80s and 90s. So to say that 50% of our fifth graders are not meeting expectations, we have a long way to go. So I just want us to be realistic about what is our benchmark. It's not, in my point of view, it's not the state. It's where do we want to be? If we want to be top 10, we have to be shooting for that 98% of 10th graders meeting or exceeding.
Absolutely.
So I'd like to see, when we get into the district improvement plan, more aggressive kind of measures towards that.
That's a really good point that you both raised too. And you'll see that's on one of the slides coming up, and sort of next steps is our commitment to identifying a subset that was sort of our comparison subset. And I think I've talked to a few committee members too, who should be included in that subset. DESE has identified a sort of the DART district, such as a comparison. DESE hasn't come out with the DART for 2022. But a couple committee members thought about, the FinCom comparisons, the budget comparisons, that to maybe help us identify a subset. So I think that's absolutely a commitment that we'll make moving forward. And I think it's reflected here, but it's just, I agree, the sort of the comparison of the state is sometimes a false pat in the back, because that's not really what we're the comparison group for us right now too. So I appreciate you raising that, recognizing that. And then Tom, to Tom's point about the growth is really interesting. I agree. So I was going to try to wait till the end, but I love this conversation. So I think if you look at those SGPs, I think it's encouraging, right, to have sort of grade levels with SGPs in the 50s, some in the 60s, right? I think generally most years to have all of your cohorts of classes in ELA and math above 50 I think should be expected, right? But is encouraging, and to have some inching closer to 60 is encouraging, right? But you situate that in a context where our achievement wasn't super high, right? So it doesn't mean that we saw some growth, but really our growth was our kids were sort of, it's at the sake of other students sort of not growing or recovering as fast as maybe our students did. So I think that sometimes that number to me, feels a little inflated too, right? If we're, because of the context that we're in right now too. So I think normally I'd be a little more encouraged with those SGPs than I am sort of this year. I will be more hopeful that if next year we have those same SGPs coming out, because then saying that that's not because the state sort of dropped and everyone's struggling and kids may not be recovering as fast, but it's because we're actually seeing our kids really outperforming their like-performing peers in the year before. So I appreciate you raising that point. Just want to give a little context on that.
Go ahead, Erin.
So I appreciate that you're going to be putting together a look at peer communities, because I think that's particularly important in the context of everybody went through COVID. So that's an equalizer, right? But there are a lot of other communities that have similar resources to us, and how did they perform? I am particularly concerned by the numbers here for our African-American population.
We'll
Not
jump
there
into
yet.
those next.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I'll just, I also wrote down peer set comparison, so I think we're all on the same page there. That's good. I mean, there are some, some encouraging sort of factors in here. I think one sort of substitute for the peer set comparison is the accountability profiles, and the numbers overall there were somewhat encouraging. I think obviously we all saw the disconnect between the middle schools is a big concern, but seeing Eaton as our highest performing elementary school is a very encouraging thing to see in terms of sort of a focused effort to sort of improve the performance of a building and the success that we had there. So scaling some of the things that we did at Eaton and implementing a lot of the new things we've been talking about, there's lots of opportunity for us. So but there are some very positive signs sprinkled in throughout what is otherwise a difficult set of scores to sort of digest in whole. And again, much of that is obviously the context that we're in, but just wanted to observe that as well.
And Sean, on that, you started to talk a little bit discrepancies between some of the schools too. And I think there's some variability to be expected, but I think there's a little bit more variability there than we would want and expect. So while we're not talking sort of publicly now about sort of each individual school, all of our schools are going to be sharing out sort of what they're doing about this in their school communities. I also think we're diving into the data to think about what does each school need to move forward to, and we're certainly very in tune with sort of how are each of our schools performing. So I think that, again, not something we want to dive in detail on the floor, but it does matter. Sort of we hold all of our schools should be up in the bar where we're seeing some of our higher achieving schools right now.
I mean, just to piggyback on that, I think we've talked a lot about collaboration between schools and allowing for that during, whether it's professional learning communities or what. But, I think when we have a school at the same level or maybe it's a grade, outperforming the others, well, what is happening differently and what can the other schools learn from that school and to make sure that we're not trying to reinvent the wheel, but, more replicate good instructional practice that's hopefully already happening in another place.
Absolutely.
Let me pull out like one positive when you have, like, for example, Coolidge, the 94th percentile of achievement percent, so achieving across the state in the 94th percentile, sort of in how the state's calculating achievement, percentile is encouraging, right? And there's some things happen to make that sort of, if you put 20 schools in a room, they're, number 19, right? To put in that, in that sort of bucket, I think is really is encouraging. There's some good things happening that should be replicated. I think that is a really important point, right? I think that's part of our job as district leaders is to identify some of the good things happening in schools and replicate those practices across, so.
Okay. All right, so the next section, we wanted to, as Erin alluded to have a conversation about the performance of selected populations. So just kind of starting with an overview of the fact that we still are seeing these discrepancies. You've heard me talk about them many times last year. You've heard Dr. Milichewski talk about them many times, that this is something that is very important to us and something that we're keeping a very close eye on. I think from that, that as a district, we have a commitment to ensuring that all of our students meet with success here in Reading. And then when we look at results, we never look at them just as the whole, but that we want to look at how selected populations in our district are performing, obviously on MCAS, but honestly, like throughout all assessments that we look at, even things when we look at students taking advanced courses, we're really looking at how are all of our kids doing and performing and having access to opportunities. So, we see there are a few encouraging things happening here, in math in particular. We see that we've had some of our selected populations making some strides. In ELA, we did not have those encouraging results. Again, seeing that a lot of our selected student populations continue to struggle. What you're seeing here are the percentages of students that were meeting or exceeding expectations. That's how to interpret those numbers. we know it's really important that we cannot have excellence in our district unless we have equity in all of our students performing. And so having selected populations that are that far off the aggregate really just does not meet with the goals and the intent of our work here in Reading. It is important for us to call it out and to acknowledge it because that's what helps us to change it and to know, like I said at the beginning, understanding the context allows us to understand the steps we can take to improve it. So instead of just saying, oh, this is what it looks like, we really need to understand why is that happening and who are the students that we're finding that the programs we have in place, the instructional practices we're using, the assessments we're using, that they're not meeting the needs of those students. And so this gives us a clearer picture of that. And as we undertake the work to improve those systems in our district, we need to do it, we're doing it in targeted ways that consider the needs of all students, but in particular, these groups that we know right now are not currently bringing to their full potential or giving them the full opportunities. So I'm going to show you now our 10th graders, again, in this selected population. One little change you'll see in 2022 is that we actually do our reporting on African American and Black students. This year we had 11 students in that group. And if you remember, we have to have at least 10 students in order to have them reported as a selected population. And so that's why you don't see that number in 2021, but you do see it in 2022. We saw, at the high school level, we saw a drop in scores for all of our students. And then we saw that pattern held true for our selected populations as well. We did have some selected populations that increased or stayed the same. But that's really not the way that we want to close the gap, is by having all students decrease. We really want to see all of our students increasing, and then in particular, seeing growth for those students that we know have a gap to close. So one of the things that we think about as we try to close those gaps and we look at particular groups of kids in our district is this year we've been looking closely at attendance, because we know that being in school, being available to interact with your teachers for instruction, for socialization, really makes a difference in student achievement. And so what I wanted to just show you here is that we do think that there is a correlation between strong attendance for students and the achievement levels that we see. So what you see here is ELA and math for grades 3 through 8. And these are students that we're meeting or exceeding. So this is the result we want, right? We want all of our kids meeting or exceeding. And in green, you see the students that were not chronically absent. And then in red, the students that were chronically absent. So chronically absent is 20%, missing 20% or more of the school year. And you can see clearly that for the students that we have more students who are not chronically absent, who are performing where we want them to. And so that to us is, we know that there are lots of other confounding things that come into play when you talk about student performance on an assessment like MCAS, but we believe that attendance is one that is important. And so that's some of the work too that we're undertaking this year, is to ensure that our students are in school and working with our families and students that are having a hard time getting into school.
Sure.
Can I just ask a quick clarifying question?
Yeah, of course.
I agree that some of the subgroup populations, the scores are even more concerning. They've continued to decline since 2019 in coming out of the pandemic years. Did you look at, or are you planning to look at attendance correlations across those subgroups? So do we see within our students with disabilities, what does attendance look like in those subgroups? What does attendance look like in our economically disadvantaged? And then looking kind of at being able to look more globally at what are the things that we can help impact to improve performance?
I wish Dr. Stice was here tonight, because this is one of her projects this year, but we actually have been building an attendance dashboard that gets updated weekly. It's something Liam is working on for us, where we have lots of data that we're pulling from our student information system to look and to track actual specific students too, once they hit certain benchmarks. So absolutely, Sarah, thanks.
I think also the data on attendance broken down by sort of by selected populations on DESE's website too. And it's really interesting. If you go back historically and look at, this is not just a Reading trend. but it does hold here, is that you see a lot of the chronically absent, percentages are higher in some of our selected populations, right? And there has to be a correlation between that and academic achievement too, right? So when we look back, if you look back last year at our attendance rates and you look at some of these populations, you can clearly say that some of the root cause of this is attendance in school too. So certainly something why we're investing a lot in sort of attendance sort of protocols, processes, and also while we're tracking that by sort of special population too.
And why are they? not
And why?
met?
Like, for example,
If your needs are not being met at school and you're.
correct. And there's some major, when we work with some of these selected population groups as a whole, there's some major barriers that we know are in place that are just beyond the academic world that we're trying to sort of get at for example, some groups we know when we look at economic disadvantage, there's some food insecurities, there's sometimes some transportation challenges, there's some barriers in place that until we change those, we're not going to see the output here in academics either. So I appreciate you raising that. And for those in the community who are interested, it's all on DESE's website to be able to see that data.
So moving forward, I know this is a lot to digest, and we have been kind of digesting it ourselves. And honestly, our work in central office over the summer and looking at our strategic plan has really been thinking about how do we move our district forward. And you've heard us, I think, talk with you many times over the past year about what we're putting in place in order to do that. Specifically looking at this MCAS presentation and thinking about how we're using this data and what we're presenting. We have some commitments going forward that we think are important to state. As I said at the beginning, this really is a baseline year, 2022. So looking at results in the future, we'll have accountability benchmarks that are based on this year. The accountability that we were able to look at this year, it doesn't include 2020, it doesn't include 2021. So this really is going to give us a stronger baseline going forward to show how our students are achieving and growing. Also, the cohort results is really important. I think that will give us a better idea of how our students are growing when we can compare the same group, how they did in third grade. Now let's look at them as fourth graders and how are they performing and growing. We also wanted to mention too that we will be sharing results with families. We will receive from the state a printout for each student that will have detailed information about their test results, and those will be mailed to parents and guardians. We didn't receive them yet, so we should be getting them in the next day or so, and then we'll turn them around as quickly as we can, get them stuffed in envelopes with labels and sent home to families. And the other piece too is that we really do commit in the future to finding what the best comparison communities are, because as I said throughout the presentation, we don't aspire to just be, the state. We really want to say, what are the communities that have similar demographics to us, and how are we doing compared to them? And so that's something that we'll work on in the future too. The other big step of moving forward is how do we actually impact better achievement and more growth for our students? So there are a lot of things underway. I want to highlight a few that I think are really important to helping you understand the way that we're thinking about this. We know that if we don't lead with intentional change, our scores are going to stay in the same place. So we are trying to be intentional about the work that we're doing and the improvements we're making. You'll hear some more about this when Tom goes over a little more detail about how we're going to measure our strategic goals. You'll hear some of these things mentioned again, but I do think it's important to understand them in this context. When we look at that, the work that we're doing, that we direct with the schools, that we ourselves do as central office leaders, it really will align with that strategic plan that we have in place, because we believe that the areas we've outlined there were gathered from truly looking at what's happening in our schools, what our students need, what our staff need, and that those are the things that are going to push the work forward. So in particular, that sense of belonging work and increasing rigorous instructional practices. Another huge part of improving outcomes for our students is the implementation of the new curricular programs that we're putting in place, and also just fidelity of implementation of high quality programs that are already in place. And so there's specific work being done this year to not only kind of get those programs up and running, but to support our teachers in the professional development that goes along with it, so that they understand. So for example, with ARC Core, that our teachers are really learning and understanding how students best access literacy instruction, what the core skills are that they need to be successful to really meet with success at the full depth and breadth of our standards. Looking at like our Envision math that's been in place for a while, are we seeing fidelity of implementation across both of our middle schools? Are we supporting our teachers and what they need in order to understand kind of, the rigor of how that math is taught and the critical thinking that our students should be developing? One other area that's really important moving forward, I think a few of you alluded to this, is assessment, right? We know this is a core component of a really strong instructional program, is being able to not only just measure our students like tonight, right, which feels like a very like kind of summative look at how our kids are doing, but the type of assessments that we need on a day-to-day basis to make decisions, tweaks, whether it's at a district level, building level, or school level, with what our kids need right in that moment to move them on to the next step. So we have some exciting things that are happening. We have, with one of the things with our new literacy program is it has an embedded assessment system, which you've all heard me talk about quite a few times. I'm very excited about it. So just, this is not really like the best visual, but just to give you a sense that we have a district dashboard that we can go into. We are just in the process now of getting our first wave of assessments in there, but it's something that we as district leaders can look at. How are our students doing in those specific skills that align with the standards? And then really, what are the things that drive them to the next level? So our teachers and schools will be setting power goals for each student based on what they know, what they need to do next. So that's a really exciting piece of assessment that will drive day-to-day work. We talked a little bit already tonight about the iReady assessments that we're rolling out in grades 6 through 8. So those are going to be implemented over the next week or so in our middle schools for the first time. Really looking forward to having those results as well. Those will help in both ELA and math at a number of levels. So looking at how are our students doing district-wide, building-wide, and then classroom-wide. And really all of those levels are important as we're thinking about calibrating and tweaking instruction. Our teachers need to know exactly, by domain, exactly what students have mastered, what particular areas might be ripe for intervention across an entire classroom. Maybe it needs reteaching or diving deeper into a standard. And maybe there are just particular students that are going to need support around skills or content. And so these assessments allow us to have some of that information at our fingertips. This year is almost a way in a pilot with iReady because we're just doing it all for the first time. I couldn't even pull like a real dashboard for you because we don't have it up and running. But within the next few weeks, we'll start to have those results coming in and really look forward to how that's going to improve learning and teaching. Few more areas that we're focused on this year in taking next steps for our district. I think you've heard us talk many times. One of the key ways to move instruction forward is by supporting our building leaders. I met today with our 5 elementary principals, where we meet fairly regularly to help calibrate and support implementation of the new curricular programs that we have. That work with our leaders is essential to getting the traction that we want on change. We have training this year for all of our district leadership team in setting up instructional leadership teams. We know that this is a key lever in buildings if we're going to move work ahead. So we're training our principals and actually learning together as a district leadership team, which is really exciting, as to what those teams look like, what their purpose is, and how they function within the buildings. So that's one example. You've also heard me mention previously the kind of shift in role of our department heads. And so they're actually forming the instructional leadership team up at the high school. Similar to that, we have a newly formed district data team, which really is driven by central office and then some principals that are participating as well. And we have a commitment to looking at lots of different types of data, whether it be student achievement data or even other metrics that we might be able to determine how our district is functioning in order to say, how are we meeting with success with our strategic plan, and then also what are the next steps for us. The heart and soul of this to me is the curriculum and the instructional practices, but that's what I would say, right? But really the work that we're focused on is to continue to look across our district and see, yes, we've got some high quality programs that we're putting in place. What are the next steps for that work? So we are forming our middle school literacy leadership team. We've already got sign-outs up to the middle school staff, have the first meeting scheduled. So that's really exciting work. And similarly, looking at the high school, what does a curriculum review process look like within a department? When you have a smaller group of people, perhaps teaching something, 2 or 3 teachers maybe. So those are things that will happen this year that I think really are important if we want to see success for all of our students through the grades. And then finally, we know that even with the strongest high quality curriculum materials, there are always going to be students that need intervention and extra support. So that continues to be an area we look at. We're kind of piloting this academic center here at the high school, rolling that out as an example. And then we continue to look at opportunities to increase that time on learning, whether it be through vacation academies or, again, hoping to run a summer academy next summer. Another way that's really important too to increase that time on learning is we know that what the student's school day looks like determines how much time on learning there is. We actually have scheduling workshops going on at all of our levels, elementary, middle, and high school right now, to say all of the time that we have our kids in front of us, how are we utilizing that, and are we using it to the way that best meets the needs of our students. So those are just a few. I wanted to just highlight those ways that I think we're trying to be strategic and intentional, knowing that if we are not, we will kind of stay where we are, and we really expect in Reading that we will have really high, terrific outcomes for our students. That's what they deserve.
So, shall we dive into a question? I want to share one thing on the on just these next steps too. I think it's really no secret in education how you start to improve academic outcomes for kids, right? You see the investments here in these areas. So if you think about high quality curriculum materials, right? One lever, right? Using assessments wisely to plan appropriate supports and interventions for kids, investing in principals and principal training, and appropriately using interventions and supports, right? I think that's no surprise. There should be no secret sauce on how to do that. I think you'll see here, we've put some of the pieces in place to be able to do this well. I think if we don't start to see improvements next year or this data in the years after, I'm not as worried about it being a strategic sort of issue. It's more of an execution issue, right? I think that the things that we have in place now on paper are things that should move the needle for kids. And now it's really on us to make sure that we execute right in all these areas that we know are what, sort of improve student outcomes, so.
So this is all really exciting work happening, and I think it's all vital to moving us forward in our instructional practices. I just want to make sure I understand the accountability piece of it. So, you talked about fidelity of implementation of curricular materials. You talked about calibration. So inevitably, the data is going to reveal that there are some gaps. There are some, probably gaps. I'm expecting gaps. So is it the principals ensuring fidelity is happening in their buildings? Is it the department heads at the high school and the principals at the other levels? And when the data starts revealing a need for more scaffolding for whether it's an individual student or a cohort or half a class, but the other half is excelling, who's recalibrating the curriculum there so that we are meeting those needs immediately?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I really appreciate you raising it. When you think about like expectations and responsibilities, it's definitely layered. Actually, one of the things that we worked on with the elementary principals today, Heather Leonard and Erin Burchell were there as well, our curriculum coordinators, was actually outlining that exact thing, talking about what are, as the district leaders, what are the expectations and responsibilities that we have when we're talking about a curriculum implementation? And then what are the things that fall in the responsibility of the building leader? And then talking about how do we support that as district leaders. So for example, one of the things that fell around on the district leaders is calibrating and making sure that there's fidelity of implementation across the 5 schools. But then what sits with the building principal is being in the classroom, performing observations and giving feedback to teachers that show if they're meeting with fidelity. And so there's that kind of that tier of expectations where the district has our role, the building principal has their role, and the teacher has their role too, right? So those are exactly the conversations and the things that we are calling attention to right now to make sure that not only is it clearly defined, but that we understand where the supports kick in. So working with our principals, this is a lot for them to implement 2 new programs in their building. What are the things that you need support in? Where are the areas that you feel like maybe you're not meeting the needs of your teachers, or you're not able to access the student data you want? Because that's one of our roles in the central office, is to make sure they have what they need. And one of the things that they need is clarity about the understanding of their role, which is part of what we're working on.
And is it different at the high school?
So at the high school, we have that additional layer, right, of the department heads, which is really a lot of the work that's happening in the ILT this year. So we've been calibrating, doing walkthroughs and calibrating around what does rigorous instruction look like. And so then the department heads, their expectations are going to be interacting with their teachers and helping to support that. And then the leadership team works through the department heads to support their growth and development in doing that.
I agree with everything Sarah shared, and to add a little bit, another layer to it too. If you had to say, fill in the blank, where does this responsibility sit? Building principal to start, right? We know, if you look at the sort of the recent research by the Wallace Foundation, which comes out that the impact of the principal is bigger than what everyone ever thought, and you're not going to improve student outcomes without having a strong building principal. We know that strong principals can improve outcomes for students by multiple months. What are the reports? Is somewhere between 2 and 7 months a year per student. It lives with the instructional improvement lives with the building principal. So with that said, right, I think a district that's doing a sort of a good job in supporting is we have to have a pulse on sort of what are we seeing in the building so we can support the principal and provide, coaching interventions, resources, whatever they may need. And I think Sarah alluded to a couple things that central office needs to do is first, keep an eye on the data, which I think now having access to dashboards which show us how students are doing in content areas, it's helpful for us to look at trends across buildings. It's helpful for us to look at trends across classrooms and then figure out what do we do to, support this building. Also, the things that Sarah talked about, doing walkthroughs, like I know Sarah's been doing walkthroughs with Heather and with the middle school principals, looking at curriculum, implementation. So those are types of supports we provide, but ultimately, the only way that you're going to get instructional improvement is through principal-based leadership, and that's why it matters so much. But I'm hopeful that some of the things that we can do can provide, like Sarah spoke about, some of the supports that we can put in place. In the high school, what we realize is that it's even more complex at the high school to put instructional leadership sort of on the back of one person in a system that's just larger, right? So the more that we can use our department heads as instructional leaders, the better off that we're going to be. That's why we're spending so much time. I appreciate all of those who are in the negotiations to move the needle on getting department heads to be able to move more into an evaluative role and supervisory role. That's huge. I think we're finally starting. I don't know if whoever did that sort of was in line with what research says about high school improvement. But to then be able to say now that our department heads are kind of moving in that way, that Kevin and also Jess Callanan's role in that is to be able to now hold accountable and support and empower our department heads to lead change in their departments. But ultimately, that accountability still sits with the person at the top of that organization. That's our building principles.
Go ahead. 2 questions. One that may be a layup, at least for the IRLA side of it, but we'll see about iReady is, are you as a central office able to see across the district with those dashboards and able to drill into school or classroom level scores as well to, quickly find both success areas and potential problem areas?
I've only been looking at it about 12 times a day. Yes. It's really adaptive. We had an initial training, still learning how to run all of the different reports, but it's pretty easy clicking around to see kind of where students are falling, what school they're from, even like what classroom they're in.
And just adding on top of that, does it then tell you what the remediation is going to be? Or, they're struggling with phonemic awareness. Okay, here's what you need to do. They're struggling with phonics. Okay, here's what you need to do.
So at the point we're in right now, teachers haven't set the power goals for individual students. That's over the next coming weeks as part of the Unit 1 work that they do. So I haven't seen what it looks like yet, but I'll get back to you on that.
And since
It
we're
will
starting,
definitely be in there at
Yeah.
the school and building level. I assume if it's in there, I'll be able to see it. I just can't tell you what it looks like yet.
okay. So I actually lied. I have 3 questions. Go for it. Because that first one was a fault. The second was a follow-up to the first one. One of the questions I asked Dr. Milczewski ahead of time, so I think you have the answer, but just so we have it public, is how have we been able to align or assign those that attended February and April vacation with the MCAS scores, and whether we saw increased growth in that subgroup or not? And do we think it's material, or is it just,
Yeah.
you know,
We definitely took a peek at that, had Liam run some numbers. So one of the things that was tricky about it is the April vacation happened after the ELA MCAS. And so February, if you remember, we had 3 days and then a snow day. So we did not see anything that we could even begin to say impacted those ELA scores. When we took math and we looked at students that participated in February, April, both or either, I wouldn't say it's like data we can present as like hard and fast, but it's promising. We did see, like for our lower grades, the kids that had the most instruction, maybe something that could start to indicate that they had, we looked at their growth percentiles, and they were pretty strong, a little bit stronger than the cohort. But I'd want to gather some more data and look at it a little bit closer before I could say that there's actually a correlation there.
Is that 3?
that was 3.
Oh, I thought that was just 2.
I can ask a 4th if you want me to. but
I mean, if
I'll
you've
wait.
got, there's technically no limit, so if you've got one, you're entitled to keep going, otherwise I've got one.
Why don't you go and
All
let's see
right.
if I want to build on it.
If Dr. King were still here, she would probably remind us of what she said on her upon her exit in June, which was, the investments in principals from a PD perspective, from an instructional leadership perspective, are important and the right thing to do. But one of the challenges, particularly at the elementary level, is sort of the operational focus of the role, given our staffing structure. So it just occurred to me, it's not something I think we've talked about since then, so as we're making these investments, have there been, on the margins, things we've done to sort of ease the burden operationally on principals, and then I'll just plant the seed that as we enter the budget process and we think about priorities for next year, that we want to, keep that thinking in the back of our minds as well.
Yeah, I would agree and echo that. I think that it is a constant balancing act for our leaders. I think in some ways it feels like a reprieve this year without some of the COVID operational things that they've had in place, but specifically like to alleviate, I don't know that I could speak to specific examples, except that we're really trying to streamline our systems, and even simple things like making sure all our field trip forms are ready to go. We've created multiple websites for our principals where everything they need is right at their fingertips. So if they need something procedural for logistics, it's much easier to get to. But I do think that it continues to be a challenge, especially given the amount of time that our principals are dedicating to attending professional development, visiting classrooms, spending time really immersing themselves in learning alongside their teachers, which is absolutely essential. And they all are really dedicated and committed to it. But it continues, to be difficult sometimes to manage all of that. It's a lot.
One thing that they have noted too that has been promising potentially too is the addition of the METCO coordinators, the school adjustment counselors too, is having just someone who can deal with some of the the counseling needs, some of the smaller issues that may pop up in the building, also some of the family liaison connections as well too. But there's also a lot of work that goes into like even building those roles out too. So I know they're investing a lot of time and effort right away to kind of map those roles out too. So I think that's one kind of encouraging role too. And I think Sarah shared too, taking away some of the COVID protocols has really helped. I think principals have some more sort of flexibility. But I think you'd talk to principals, they say the job's never been more complex. Like even, it just gets harder. So I don't think that principals would say that they feel like they're able to move away from the ops world and focus fully on sort of what we know is going to make academic improvements. So I think you make a good point that during the budget season, we need to think about that and what's appropriate supports look like, because the job is not an easy job and it's not getting easier, and pushing them to focus on curriculum implementation and assessment use is a lot when they have a lot on their plate as well.
Yeah, and I think, just maximizing the value of these investments that we're making in PD and we're making in instructional leadership training and that sort of thing, comes from making sure that they have the time to execute and practice those things, right? So, we'll get a bump. We'll see a bump from having them just sort of be better trained and more effective instructional leaders. But we'll get a bigger bump if they also have the ability to focus on that, more frequently outside of sort of training environments as well. So, go ahead, Carla.
Yeah, to piggyback on that, we have had those conversations about stipended positions or portions of positions for certain operational issues, but knowing that they just creep up so quickly and they need to be addressed immediately. You can't be pulling a teacher out to deal with stuff like that. Potentially with the Medco counselor role, that person is not in a classroom, potentially that role could support it, right?
Can help.
Right.
Go ahead.
It's not a question, more of an idea. And I think we've talked a lot in this group about time on learning and improving time on learning, increasing time on learning. And I know there were some questions in the last meeting that I missed with regards to extended day. Is there an opportunity for us to leverage extended day in a more educational way as well? We in a couple of years ago when that was at bursting at its seams, we talked about reaching out to partners around Reading that would help and provide other types of supports, and it was really kind of focused on like the sports zone groups and stuff like that. But we have a lot of other academic groups here in Reading as well that potentially could augment or support that time, whether it's Kumon, whether it's Mathnasium, whether it's Russian math, whatever it might be. That if we knew areas that needed focus and kids that needed focus that were in those extended day programs, it might be, a possibility of adding an additional hour a couple days a week for certain students that were at risk, that are already going to be in the building because mom or dad can't pick them up because they're both working or whatever else the case might be. So just, again, sort of out of the box, but if we're talking about time on learning, it doesn't necessarily have to be all of the stuff in the normal day. But if there's something else we can do to extend that, either before or after, for those kids that need additional support.
Absolutely. That's a good idea. Okay, anything else? I couldn't tell if you were about to say something profound or just done reading the slides. Okay.
Taking it all in.
Okay.
I've some thoughts, but
okay.
It's a process.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Hardy. Why don't we take just a quick 5-minute recess, and then we'll tackle the remainder of our agenda. So we'll come back at 9:35. All right, I call the meeting back to order. So we will now move to the district improvement plan review, and really this is about, I think, discussing the evidence that we can expect against the strategic objectives that we talked about last time. So Dr. Milczewski, I will hand it to you.
Great. I'm going to speak really loud. I think that mic's coming. Otherwise, I was going to have to.
We wore out our mic.
So at our last committee meeting, we talked a little bit about our district and how we arrived at our district strategic plan, and also gave an outline of how we were approaching our district improvement plan, which was a outline the specific steps that we were going to take at the district level to live out our district strategic plan. In the same way that we expect schools to come up with school improvement plans on how they're going to be able to move their school forward, we also have created a district improvement plan to show how we're going to live out our district strategic plan. Eventually, we're going to have in one sort of document our district strategic plan, then our district improvement plan, followed by each school improvement plan. You should see through lines between all of those. Also, next year, we're going to expect that all of our operational departments also create a improvement plan that also incorporates the goals too. So the through lines also go from the district level to school level and also all of our operational departments. What we wanted to do tonight was we want to talk a little bit about what can the community expect to see from us in measurables to sort of in terms of public accountability, and what are we committing to showing and measuring our own progress. So we're going to go through pretty quickly, because this is in the packet, around what you could expect within each strategic objective. So this first strategic objective around safe and supportive learning environments, the three major headings for that around, first, build a shared understanding of sense of belonging and identify common indicators to measure our progress. The second goal is to review and implement practices, systems, and staffing models that foster inclusive environments. And then third, to create, refine, and align safety-centered processes and protocols. This is a lot of the work that Dr. Stiles is leading within her student services scope of work. Some of the things that you can expect to see from us this year in terms of progress monitoring updates and evidence of progress are the following. One, attendance data dashboard. We believe that there's a strong correlation between how students feel at school and a sense of belonging and attendance. It's not an ironclad sort of correlation. We know there's other factors that impact attendance, but we need to have a handle on attendance. So what we can expect is to provide updates to the committee and to the community periodically about our student attendance, particularly in areas of, like we talked about tonight, some of our special populations, and also in terms of both 10 or more absences and chronic absenteeism. So closely monitoring attendance. 2, Panorama data. So for those who aren't familiar with Panorama, I believe that the district used Panorama years ago. It's a way for the district, or districts across the country really, measure progress on research-based questions. And it can be something as simple as tell us how you feel about your school experience, and the questions can be targeted to students, to staff, or to families. I remember when I was a principal, all of our staff had questions about me as the principal around instructional leadership, community engagement, school safety. The benefits of this type of surveys, it gives you not only your scores, right, what percentage of your students feel that they have a trusted adult at school, but it also compares it against your other schools in the district and across the state. So it gives you some reference points. So our goal is to identify some questions that we think align to sense of belonging. Some of them may be, do you have a trusted adult that you can go to, that you feel that you have a voice in your school community? So we're in the process of identifying some of those questions, and the community can expect, and our committee can expect to see some of the high-level data dashboard around the trends that we're seeing in terms of sense of belonging. Something that we're tracking closely that we think is important in terms of welcoming and inclusive school environments is tracking what's our advanced coursework participation rates look like. What percentage of our kids are taking advanced coursework, and who are those kids, sort of in terms of demographics who are taking those courses? That's all available on DESE's site, but I think we're making a more concerted effort to consistently track and make sure that we are equitable in terms of who has access to our advanced coursework. You'll see here there's a lot of work this year around attendance protocols, crisis response protocols, mandated reporting protocols, discipline protocols, field trip protocols. You can expect to see some of those protocols published on our district website or presented to either the committee or to the policy subcommittee. You should see some of this work of sense of belonging and around safe and supportive learning environments lived out in our school improvement plans. And then the other thing our committee can expect to see is updates periodically from our sense of belonging networks with the state. So As Dr. Sai shared in our last meeting, we're a part of several cohorts, learning cohorts with Learn Launch through the state, which is kind of supporting us and teaching us and coaching us around our sense of belonging work. So the committee can expect to see some of the products from that work there too. So I think here a combination of some quantitative sort of data points and also some qualitative data points as well. We'll move, let's move through all of the measurables of sort of here. Well, I'll turn to Dr. Hardy, who's going to speak a little bit about the teaching and learning side, and then Ms. Patano is going to speak a little bit about the operational side. Then I'll pause for questions or feedback around what you're thinking about the measurables.
So our second strategic objective is focused on coherent instructional systems. And we look kind of the main categories under this strategic objective is calibrating district-wide rigorous instructional practices, ensuring high-quality curriculum materials, and creating a comprehensive assessment system district-wide. And so what you should expect to see, what I should be able to share with you, what we should be able to share with you to show that we're moving this work ahead are a number of things. Obviously, going forward, we'll be showing progress on our MCAS benchmarks. As we alluded to, this is a building year, benchmark year. Similarly, another assessment that especially indicates what the rigor of instruction is for students is our access data. So that is information that comes out usually to us in the late spring. Next, we would also be completing reviews of agendas from our district instructional leadership team. As I mentioned to you a little bit earlier this evening, that work really is pivotal to supporting a lot of the curriculum development and the implementation of rigorous programs. In addition, within that group too, we're addressing that first goal area. So really digging in and looking at our, calibrating our understanding around rigorous instruction. As you peruse this second strategic goal, you see that there's a lot of things that will result in some published practice and district-wide documents and inventory. So for example, as we are establishing the shared understanding of rigorous instruction, that will probably come through in some type of document where that information is shared out. When we are finding and naming rigorous instruction within our curriculum materials, those will become documents that are shared by our building leaders and teachers. One area in particular where you'll see documentation or district-wide documents is as we are creating this comprehensive assessment system. So really mapping out what are the assessments in our district, what is the purpose of each of them, who is responsible for their implementation, analysis, and particularly how are they used and how do they connect with each other, which are used for more formative assessments and which are the ones that we rely on for more of those summative. So kind of mapping out what assessment looks like in our district. Similar to the first strategic area, our school improvement plans should also start to document some of the steps that we're taking, what it looks like at the building level. One of the really important outcomes that we'll be able to share with you, we look forward to sharing with you, are multi-year plans for special education program review implementation. This is an extremely important part of ensuring that we have rigorous instruction for all of our students. We know that there are significant findings in those reports and that we need to develop plans so that we can set into action the recommendations that are going to best meet the needs of all of our students. The formation of our district level data team really is to help impact across this strategic objective, an opportunity for us to look at where instruction, rigorous instruction is happening, and then also to look at the impact of high quality curriculum materials. And then finally, a commitment to looking at how we're communicating with families about student learning based on our district-wide common assessments. We know that bringing parents and guardians and caregivers into the equation and to help having them understand how their students are performing and what supports they need to get to the next level is a really important lever for us in order to move this work ahead. And it's a strategy that sometimes we don't employ as well as we could. So that's an area that we look forward to providing evidence of progress in.
The strategic objective 3 is focused on school operations. We believe efficient operations, operational systems are at the foundation of the success of students and our staff. We're going to focus on 2 primary areas. We're going to evaluate and improve specific school and district level operational departments and systems, and we're going to leverage and optimize all resources, including staffing, time on learning, and funding. The evidence of our progress will include an assessment of our student food service program. We'll have guidelines and training in order to ensure that our buildings are updating our websites and using our websites as a tool for community outreach and community engagement. We will have an SIS, Student Information System Needs Assessment, that's begun here at Reading Memorial High School, and we'll continue to work on establishing priorities and needs for that system, reviewing specific questions to consider on an efficient system, and reviewing the onboarding costs and processes for that system. Such a system would save considerable time for our building leaders so that they could shift their focus on learning and teaching. We're going to focus on SPED staffing inventory and recommendations for student groupings and staff allocations to ensure that we're optimizing all of our staff members and their time in order to serve students. We are going to continue our efforts to embed our full day K costs into our operating budget so that by FY26, hopefully we can have universal free full day K. And then lastly, our HR department will work with us with all of us, the system, to define and automate our hiring and our licensure practices for our staff members and develop protocols for staff recruitment focused specifically on trainings for principals. Happy to answer any questions.
So I guess what we're looking for tonight from the committee too was just any feedback on what you see here as things that maybe that might be missing, or additional things that you'd like to see to show progress towards what we've outlined here in the district improvement plan.
Tom and I are looking to see whose hand's going to go up first.
I've gone first too many times. Your turn. Sean's hands is up.
Want to go first?
Yeah, I'll go first only because I just want to make an observation. I really appreciate that these bits of evidence in almost every case are not just activities. It's either something like something quantifiable that we're measuring, or a tangible output, like a tangible defined output. That's, I think, incredibly helpful for us kind of having accountability, against progress on these things. So I just wanted to say that I appreciate that. I'll invite others to contribute as well. Sarah.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Building off of that, I guess I would say I appreciate that there are more specific outcome or points of evidence. I was hoping to see more, down a few layers deeper, more specific, measurable, what can we expect in terms of outcomes. I think, the MCAS scores are really sobering. We are where we are. What are we going to do? What direction do we want to head? What's our bar? What are we capable of? And then how do we want to get there? And I guess I just didn't feel the urgency necessarily that I felt after looking at the MCAS scores. Like, okay, what are we going to do? I think most of that was around, there's a lot of planning, critical, necessary. We need to do all of these things. We need to inventory. We need to assess. We need to do all those things. I guess I didn't feel like there was enough doing in the improvement plan. What are we going to do with it? How are we, I guess maybe as we go through the year, seeing shorter, more agile kind of plan, do, measure to see, okay, what are we doing? Yes, we need to assess, we need to inventory, we need to do all those things, but what are we actually doing to move the needle by the end of the year? Because this is urgent. We can't take a whole year just to plan how we're going to look at our special ed programs or to move the needle on our MCAS scores. We actually need to do the work too. And while I think we'll be doing that, we have to reflect how we're going to measure our success in the plan.
me to go now?
Sure.
You can tell Sarah and I are both product owners, because I was thinking a very similar related process, and it's a, corporate related concept there of, mini sprints of getting things done and measuring the mini sprints and then continuous improvement. We've talked so much on continuous improvement. I appreciate that some of these are specific in terms of deliverables that we're going to receive, like Sean was saying. Some of them are extremely vague, and they're not smart in that regard. So, attendance dashboard. What is it that we expect to reduce the number of chronic absenteeisms by this year, right? If it's 20% of our students were chronic absents, hopefully it's no longer a COVID year, but removing COVID as a reason for the chronic absenteeism, which we've talked about is kind of a hard thing with the data collection from last year, but is 15% a reasonable target? It seems like it should be, right? But what is our target that we're trying to achieve with some of these things that the processes you're putting in place are actually doing, right? And trying to go for, because that has a direct and measurable impact, as you've proven earlier tonight, on the MCAS scores, right? And how do those things work? I've been in the past one who's wanted more specificity around MCAS as well. Whether that is, 3 through 8, whether that's 10, whether that's, some of those take the weaker ones if you need to, and say, this cohort, we're gonna, shoot for an SGP of 60, because they're low already, so they should be able to grow pretty quickly, and, whatever, something else along those lines, right? So make sure it's realistic. That's the other part of SMART. I'm not asking you to say 90% SGP or anything else like that, but what's realistic that they can then, achieve as a result of it. And in this review cycle, in this 1 year period, we're not going to see that final outcome because it doesn't come until late August, early September, but we should have something we're targeting that we can come back and say, yeah, we achieved it or we fell short here. And if we fell short, okay, we may have fallen just barely short, but what did we do? How much progress did we make? I think that's the specificity here needs to be tuned up a notch. For me to be comfortable with it as a final thing, I think outline and structure, I like a lot, from Sean's perspective. A couple other nitpicky points to a degree. We purposely made this a 1 year document, right? Advanced placement participation rates mean nothing in this 1 year. They already signed up, they're already in classes, there's no measurement there for this 1 year. Unless you're going to say, and maybe this is what your target is, who's signing up for next year. However, and I've argued this until I'm blue in the face, that doesn't really mean much either. It's the long range goal here for advanced placement improvement, because they need to have that foundation from first grade, second grade, third grade, fourth grade, fifth grade to be able to participate at that level. You can't just throw a kid who's in 9th grade now or 10th grade now and say, oh, go to AP, if they haven't had the foundation, right? So you're almost setting yourself up for failure unless you look at this as more of a long-term goal. That's my 2 cents. There might be some kids who can achieve it, and maybe it's a push for those kids. Maybe that's the goal here, and maybe we need to explicitly state that as such, so like they don't feel they can achieve that versus, they actually could. Maybe that's where the goal is, but it'd be good to understand that. As we look at some of the next page down, the reviews of agendas for district instruction leadership teams, I think that's okay. I don't personally feel like we're going to get much out of that. What I'd love to see more of is, what's your PD plan for the professional development of the teachers, right? What is going to take place on November 18th or November 6th or whatever that day is, right? What does that agenda look like? Because we've talked about as well that we're pushing and helping our teachers grow in some of this stuff with ARC and with other things. And some of it's laid out for you already, so it might be a layup, but I would love to see more of that too, as we talk about some of that foundational stuff of what's going on there. The last one on this item, the communication with families of student learning, I applaud you for that. I love that. It should go up above. It's a question about whether they feel safe in the schools as well. Your parents, if you have that conversation with the parents and how they're engaging with students, those parents feeling safer at school and having those conversations, the kids are going to feel safer in school and having those conversations as well. It's not just about the outcomes, it's also about how do we bring the parents in for the conversation, and that brings them into the supporting the overall growth and of the student and their willingness and ability to attend school as well. So I just said a whole mouthful. I'll pause because there wasn't really a lot of questions there, as much as statements, but great start. I think there's still a little bit more to tune up in it.
Good thing, 'cause I had one thing on just a comment too, on the MCAS, on the piece on the progress towards MCAS benchmarks. What we assume is that that's MCAS toward the state-defined benchmarks. So as you probably know, this is a level-setting year, and next year we'll have state targets that outline for multiple years. So we were planning, once those are released, that the targets that are set for us are the ones that we would sort of set as our initial bar. If the committee wants me to use something differently than the ones that are sort of set, I'm comfortable with that. I didn't write explicitly here that these are the ones defined. We're not determining our own benchmarks. These are, again, through the formula, whatever formula they have. So just want to put that for food for thought and kind of open to whatever the committee wants, but just want to name that that's sort of what we meant by that one.
Okay, that's clarifying for me. Can you, and maybe I'm the only one who missed it, because maybe it was discussed in the last meeting, can you outline what are they targeting in that regard? Is it a 1-year target, a 3-year target, a 5-year target? What does it mean?
Yeah, so I haven't heard, so in the past, it's been multi-year target, right? So I think if you look back, there was actually even targets towards 2022 that I think were set back, was it 3 or 5 years? Was it 3 years ago? I believe it's 3-year targets, I believe. And I don't know the formula between how they're, but it's like incremental growth, right? But I don't know how they're set. And I've found them that they've been relatively high, but attainable, right? So I don't think that's a low bar, but at least if we can look at the formula of how they're sort of measured and then see if that makes sense for us, I think that's, but DESE, we were on a call with them, said they are going to set those and we should be getting those soon. They call them the accountability targets.
So that's the top level school accountability number, of which MCAS is one portion of that.
And they're going to say your overall 3 through 8, sort of advanced, they use scaled score, right? They expect to be sort of in, go up 7 percentage points or something, right? Whatever it may be, or 7 points. If you look back at sort of on DESE's website, you can see that in the past, they have the benchmarks outlined there and whether or not schools hit their benchmarks. They also give benchmarks not only for all students, but also for your special populations too. So you get credit in that formula about the accountability percentile, you get credit for both your all students and your special populations too. So that work's already done. So that's why I didn't plan to sort of reinvent what that metric was, but again, I'm happy to kind of get more research on how exactly it's calculated and then to bring that back to the committee too.
We can do independent research too. You don't have to do all that. That's news to me. It shouldn't be, but it is news to me that they're doing that and that level. So I guess I'm cautiously okay with that until we understand what it means.
And that's where I have and we talked about this too, that's where I have a little bit of a hard time with thinking about, some of these are still inputs, right? Where you expect if you do these things well, it's going to lead to us hitting the benchmark. So for example, reviews of agenda from district instructional leadership training trainings. Because I think what we do with principals really matters, right? So I think we should be open and transparent about what we're doing with principals. Is there a way to quantify that, like the impact? That's difficult, but you believe that would have a tangible impact on sort of what's going to happen in the progress towards the benchmarks. That's where I feel like I have a little bit of a hard time. I can quantify easily the benchmarks. Did we hit this benchmark, yes or no? Both in MCAS and access data, we can quantify. Some of these other ones, I have a harder time kind of quantifying. So again, I'm open to committee feedback on how do we get more specific in some of those things that seem like inputs to get to better MCAS scores, better access scores, things like that.
Can I follow-up comment? I think I would feel next level layer down would get us to more of that specificity. So what are we going to do specifically to communicate with specific groups of parents around assessment? So we will communicate early bird literacy screenings to pre-K to second grade. I can't remember the grades we're doing. Parents, we will look at, what are we specifically doing with English curriculum, ELA curriculum at the middle school? So going down the next layer below some of these kind of key results, since I'm getting brain dead right now. So we're inventorying the RPS adopted high quality curriculum. What specifically are we going to do? So I think that next layer down for me gives that specificity. And in terms of, I think the next discussion we have around the MCAS benchmarks, I think challenging ourselves to say maybe it's meeting and exceeding the benchmarks that the state sets for us. How do we keep incrementally setting the bar higher for ourselves rather than just kind of mediocre? I should probably get this to like embroidered on a pillow, but I try is an excuse not to do. So if we're going to try to do something, it's kind of just that middling level. We're going to do it because we're capable of doing it. And how are we going to get there?
I think some of that level of specificity you're looking for is the work this year. So when I think about like especially inventorying where rigorous instruction is like met through our high quality curriculum, like, part of the work is identifying that and then seeing where the gaps are and then putting together a plan to identify that gap. Similar like with your comment about the middle school literacy, like obviously a very important area for us to address this year. But our job with that team is to put together the implementation steps or the plan going forward. So to guess at what that plan's going to be, that level of detail doesn't exist yet. That is the work this year, is to compile that. And then that will be, that will be like a very strong piece of evidence that we can submit that we have worked towards the goals here.
Go ahead,
Erin. So strategic objective number 1, supportive and safe learning environment. I love everything that's underneath it, but then you get to the evidence and I'm struggling with whether that's really gonna show us whether students are feeling safe and supported in school. Because ultimately we're talking about the kids and their perspective. So I guess I'm wondering, is there more in the works that's not reflected here? Is this a YRBS survey year? I think it is. No?
That was last year, correct?
I thought we got reported on it last year and it happened the spring before.
Survey, yeah.
So maybe we wouldn't have the results back in time, but I think they get it this year. But, so are we hearing from the students? Do they feel safe and supported? Also, we've invested a lot of money in mental health supports. How are we tracking that? Is there a way to track, we have all these new school adjustment counselors, how many kids are they working with and what capacity? So I guess I want more information on that. So, I think attendance is huge, right? Like kids aren't coming to school if they don't feel safe in school. So I get that, but I do think that's like a particular subset of our school population that like struggles to get to school in the first place. But we have a lot of kids that are here in our schools that don't feel safe and supported. At least not all the time by everyone they interact with on a daily basis. So I'm more interested in what are we doing for them so that they feel better throughout the school day. And I think there's more going on. I don't feel like it's reflected in your evidence list.
Good feedback. I think the one that, and again, this is a hard one to quantify. How does a student feel like they belong or that they're valued at school? We spend a lot of time thinking about that. I think the one for us, the biggest one, is the Panorama data. That's a survey that goes directly to kids, which we're still determining what are those question sets that helps us determine what makes you feel welcome, safe, like included, right? So I think we're working with Panorama now to identify that 5, 10 questions that every kid will take. It'll say, kids in this school, kids in this grade level feel this. This compares to other schools in the district this way. This compares to others, the statewide this. So I think Panorama data is the piece that we're using on that, right? I appreciate, we thought a lot about too with how do you measure the impact of the school counselors? I mean, we're struggling with that, right? It's hard because you can see the amount of kids, that helps, but just because someone sees 900 kids doesn't mean that that's the impact. So I think that that's one of those that just, and I'm sharing this to say we're open to feedback, right? This is, in a lot of districts are asking the same question, how do we measure this? And I don't know out there the only way outside of sort of Panorama and anecdotal sort of interviews with students that gets us what we're looking at. But we're open to ideas, so.
I think big component of this section is the YRBS. I mean, that's, and if there's something else that can do some of what that does, it may be that panoramic. But, I mean, that's always, I've always thought of that as a big piece of this section would be the YRBS results.
Carla?
I think a lot of, like, when I saw this list, I was happy with it. There were things that I said, okay, I know they're going to do this, this, and that underneath it. Because there are certain things, the attendance dashboard, the panorama dashboard, things like that, that, like you said, Sarah, like you have to go through it to see which direction it's going to take you into. So some of this stuff I think can be more defined, but I understand that a lot of it is, it's a work in process. And maybe our solution to that is, like a quarterly update or something, just to kind of bring you through what can you define now, but then what steps can bring us, quarterly can bring us to the next level.
Yeah, I feel a little bit like we, in some instances, maybe verging on conflating, evidence of implementation of a strategic plan with the goals, right? Which sort of sit on top to some degree. So, I think for me, maybe the way that I've been thinking about this is we've identified at a high level what we believe are a lot of the opportunities and challenges within the district. We have particular metrics that we're very familiar with that we're not comfortable with, MCAS scores, YRBS results, et cetera, things that are, the word sobering, I think, has been used for some, I think Sarah used that word just now. So we have things that we're not sort of comfortable with. I think that there's almost like a foundational year here where we need to get to a place where one of the things we are very responsible for is setting goals, and that we put ourselves in a place where we can set those goals, maybe more quantifiably than we have in the past. And I don't know that the pieces of evidence is the place to go a click down, because the do to some degree is what's captured in the strategic objectives themselves. The click down is the operational work that the team does against the strategic objectives that we've all agreed to and signed off on, and the goals that we'll help define. So, I hear the concerns, and I think many of us have sort of the desire to be, to understand the data at a deeper level and to have more tangible outcomes that we can point to as that's where we want to get. I just want to sort of call out that in this context, these are pieces of evidence that we're executing against a strategic plan, not the goals themselves, right? So that's all.
Can I speak to one more thing?
Please,
On
yeah.
the same one. So advanced coursework participation rates jumped out at me as well. I guess I'm wondering what you were looking for in that. Are we talking about overall you want to see that increase at the high school? Are you talking about you want to see that increase for certain cohorts? Maybe it's both. But there's sort of a larger cultural issue there that I've encountered and that I hear a lot about, which is there are teachers in this district that discourage kids from taking advanced courses. So we can want kids to take more, but we also need to ensure that that's the expectation that or not expectation, but that's the culture that we want to build, where we're trying to build up kids' capacity. We're trying to encourage them to seek rigor. And in the instances where it's believed that they're ready for the challenge, that is encouraged universally. So whether you're taking a class with this teacher or this teacher, we're going to have the same benchmark there. So it's hard to say like, oh, we just want to see more kids taking advanced courses Like, is that being talked about at the larger level? Both, you know, I think it's an 8th grade thing, but it's also then when you start getting into APs, and there are teachers that have very firm beliefs about, you know, who should take AP and when. And we, as a school, have had inconsistencies on what we've allowed, which is a whole other issue, so.
Great question, great conversation. I think this goes to Tom's previous point too. If we just wanted to have good data this year, right? Putting our neck out there on data around advanced coursework would be a tough one because it's a multi-year process to open up pathways for kids to sort of end up in advanced. It's not a quick fix, right? It's not just a technical fix, move a kid into an advanced course. So I think that's why sort of these categories are called like evidence of progress. This would be something we should be monitoring this year. We should be looking at years to come, right? But we can't expect all of a sudden we're shifting into 90% of our kids are taking advanced coursework. Also want to clarify, advanced coursework is not just AP classes too. So if you look on DESE's website, it gives sort of the categorization of what's an advanced course. It includes dual enrollment classes. It also includes some classes from innovation pathways, which we'll be discussing. So it's also about just opening some of those other doors up to kids too. So right, the high school, we're trying right now to offer more dual enrollment classes through Endicott College, also through partnerships with Middlesex too. So it's for some kids who maybe don't want to go into AP Calc, but can take a class that's really going to set them up on a different trajectory. I think that's a way that school needs to be accountable in opening those doors too. So I think it's just thinking more holistically about what is an advanced course and that. And I think you allude to it, there's a lot of challenges, right? And there's a lot of philosophical differences in how we should be pushing kids into what's considered advanced coursework. And you know that's not an easy sort of thing to shift or to change. And I know there's very different camps and views on that. So I don't have an answer to that, other than I can tell you our high school team is very driven to have kids in sort of advanced coursework on a broader definition of what advanced coursework looks like. But that's a really difficult thing to get everyone swimming in that direction too.
I think the broader conversation about sort of embracing rigor and not viewing rigor as like the antithesis of the sense of belonging and that sort of thing is probably part of that sort of cultural shift as well.
I mean, we have across the state, and I say the same in Reading, there's people who believe that MCAS is not a good sort of measure, right, of student academic outcomes, right? So when we talk about sort of, for someone I can say, for my perspective, for me, the data is concerning, right? When I see that data, I believe that we owe it to kids to raise the bar, right? We owe it to, when we see for all kids and also for some of our special populations. And I think it's one strong metric to show how we're doing in terms of academic progress. But we know that some people disagree with that, right? And that view is that shouldn't be how we're measuring sort of our progress too. So you're right, when you're trying to lead instructional improvement and lead instructional change, that's a hard argument sometimes when you don't agree on sort of what you think the outcome should be to measure progress too. So that's just a reality, and that's a reality with all of our constituents. We have families who see that very differently. We have staff who see that very differently too. So that's why I also tend to believe if you put a lot of these right inputs in place, you're going to see those outputs across not only MCAS results, but you should see those in other measurements too in terms of student success. But I think that's a reality that we're navigating too as we push for rigor. It's not sort of openly received by everyone in terms of, yes, bring this on. This is what I think is where we should be focusing our efforts.
Okay. Any other thoughts on this one?
Are we voting tonight on this, or are we?
We're not voting on this. I don't think we need to vote on the evidence anyway. We vote on it on the objectives and the plan itself.
We already voted on.
Sean, can we do this then, since I think we heard some feedback tonight that I think it's important for us to think through? And I'd like committee support too on this, is that we can commit to trying to find some more, to be more explicit with some of what those benchmarks are around MCAS, maybe some more of those benchmarks are around, attendance, around panorama data, be a little bit more explicit on some of those quantifiable data sources. And I think if the committee also has feedback individually on just maybe some of those others that may be harder to kind of quantify, I think we're open to feedback. So over the next couple of weeks prior to our meeting, please let us know if you have any thoughts, feedback, and maybe we can present a revised version with just some updates from what we heard tonight in an upcoming meeting.
Yeah. Can I add something?
Yeah.
I think that's a really great point, because in particular, as we were selecting these, one of the things we were thinking about is we want to be updating the committee and the community regularly on these, not like at the end of the year, we come before you and say, oh, by the way, here's everything. So we were also trying to guide these a bit, but like, what are the things that we know as we go through the course of the year that we're going to be producing and creating that we can then share out with the committee? So I think it would be a good collaboration for us to figure out exactly what information is going to be helpful so that you do understand the steps we're taking, because this is the work really that we're doing each and every day when we come into work.
So that lines up with where I was trying to go, I think, a little bit here too, is I'm mentally trying to get my head around how to make this more tangible, I think. There's a lot of tangibleness in it, but how do you make it more tangible? So, as we talk about advanced coursework participation as an example, and Erin's point is spot on, isn't it more of a deliverable or a continuous deliverable of removing barriers to, through evidence of X, right, by time T, right? I mean, if we take the SMART, which is what they're supposed to be, as much as possible, what's the specific side of it, what's realistic, what's the time, and how are we measuring it, so that it's achievable? That is where I'm struggling with this, is how do we make it, you put the big level objectives, but what are the goals underneath the big level objectives that you can measure and say, this is happening? So in this particular case, right, we've talked about middle school math as one example, as one thing that's a barrier to some of this place. So, by the end of December, form the middle school math committee comprised of X, which will look to examine how we can, adjust or remove the barrier for middle school math, or something like that, right? I'm spitballing it as I go, but
I think he said they're gonna go back to the drawing board and kind of come back with something different, right? So.
yeah, but I'm just trying to be more,
more.
I'm trying to give more of an example of what that.
Can we play that out? So that's a good one to play off of, because we have that committee form. So it's us two with Allison Williams, Heather Leonard, Jess Callanan, Rochelle Rubino, Sarah Marchand, Kevin Tracy, looking at middle school to high school math pathways. So we've had a series of meetings. We have another one next week to say sort of where do we go from here. So now here the challenge is that what we've identified are 3 problem statements. We know what the issues are, which basically that sometimes a kid's future in math is dictated at 6th or 7th grade. Right? And there's no fluid pathways for kids to mix in and out, right? We've identified that as a problem statement. I don't know yet where that work's going to lead, right? Because there is a lot of different research around sort of ways we could go about that. So is it better for me to write on here, hey, the goal is to form the team by December, okay? And then have actionable recommendations by March. It's still nothing, I can't get more tangible than that yet, because I don't know what the recommendations are going to be yet. I don't know sort of what our possibilities will be at, and I don't know if forming the team and giving recommendations really gives it more teeth. So that's where I feel a little bit stuck with something like that, of how do I make that more measurable, right? So I think that's a good example to play out. Whether you have thoughts now, I'm open to it, or if you just think about that a little bit and think about how could we make that sort of clearer and more, SMART-like, because we're living that one now.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to play that out, we're getting late, but I'll just add 2 things to that, right? I think I've probably beaten the table quite a bit. Where's the parents in that committee? Yes, you guys as the administrative team are directly involved, but parents have been asking for this for a long time. Where are they to provide the input in terms of what their students are, realizing, and how, maybe they are impacted or not impacted? That's one thing in terms of the committee forming itself. But what you just said, I think, is actually, it's a measurable goal with recommendations of how to solve the problem by March. That's not a problem to say that. It doesn't mean that we will have solved it, but there's measurable, tangible evidence that the group has come together and you have a recommendation. Now, the question would be, is March suitable? Is June more achievable? Is January suitable, because then it can be in the budget for the next year, right? So challenge yourselves in that as you think about it, and just say, which of these priority items do we need to get done at which point in time to prepare ourselves for this particular thing we're trying to get done? Maybe this isn't something that will be done this year, because you have so many other things that are going to be budget drivers into next year. But maybe it's suitable to say by the end of June, end of the school year. That's okay. And then that leads to recommendations that lead to the next year, that leads to the next budget cycle. But there's nothing wrong with what you just said. Just think about what the timing is and how it stacks and what you can, I mean, to Sarah's point, you're going to plan to present these things anyway. That is a success point to say, yes, we achieved this goal. And hopefully the recommendation is do nothing. I mean, it's not do nothing, right? But theoretically, that's a possibility, but you know, at least we would have looked at it. We would have had people at the table to have that conversation.
Okay. How do we feel about this topic? We good?
I could talk for hours about math pathways, Sean.
I'm sure we could,
Just
but
you wait.
Susan's waiting for me to play that trumpet music that Edwin Diaz gets rushing in from the bullpen, so.
Bridge version.
Let's move on. Ms. Baton will bring us home with the last three items here. We'll start with the enrollment update.
Well, included in your packet is our unofficial enrollment for October 1st. And I refer to it as unofficial because as of October 1st, we collect all of the student enrollment information by demographic, by grade, by school. And then our learning and teaching admin assistant, Lauren Miller, reviews and ensures that the data is reconciled before it becomes the final SIMS report that's submitted to the state at the end of October. This information shows that we have a total enrollment of 3,847 students, and that's 72 students more than what we had projected last year, and one student more than our enrollment from last year. I wanted to point out that our Boston resident enrollment is in fact 102 students. There's a typographical error in the memo. It reads 140, but it's 102. And 102 students includes the 40 new students that was added to our enrollment through our METCO grant expansion. We also have 10 school choice students enrolled, 47 multilingual learners enrolled, which is up by 6 students from last year. And then lastly, our special ed enrollment is about 665 students, which is 17 fewer than last year. And our special ed enrollment are those students who are on individual education plans. I think just 2 other quick observations I'll share with you is that Birch Meadow and Coolidge Middle School grew both by 27 students each, and grades 1 and 3, followed by middle school grades 6 and 8, saw the largest growth in enrollment. If you have no questions, I'll move on. Yes, go ahead.
I do have a question.
Sure.
One comment and one question or follow-up request, I guess. The statement about the number of kids on IEPs, I felt like was a little bit misleading just to present the number. Yes, it's true the number is down, but the percentage is actually about the same. It's actually about a percentage higher than it was pre-pandemic. So we're still continuing to see, we're about 17.2% of kids on IEPs in the district, which is, we had consistently been around 16 historically. So I think important to note, we still have high levels of need there. And then this is a follow-up request, the grade breakdown on IEPs. It was interesting. I'd love to see a comparison year over year. So what did it look like pre-pandemic, pre-2019? What does it look like? Are we finding the kids we need to be finding eligible?
So instead of looking at this data just for the prior year, let's look at it over time. I can do that.
Can you, I didn't hear what you said, I'm sorry.
Instead of looking at a comparison of enrollment, prior year over current year, we can look at it over time. So pre-pandemic, maybe beginning with FY18, for example.
Just to get the context of what we're seeing.
Sure, I think it's a great idea.
Good.
I was going to build, I'm going to build directly on that. I'm going to ask that it be cohort-based instead of year-based.
Cohort-based.
Because if you look at this right now, you see, you know, from pre-K to K, somehow we've dropped 9. which is shocking. And so my obvious question here, is that because they're out of district, or did they really roll off the plans? It was maybe an SLP-related plan or something, and they don't need it anymore? You know, so that's possible, but then from K to 1.
Pre-K has 2 years of students also, so that there could be a blip there.
That would be good to break pre-K
Yeah.
down appropriately then too. You know, K to 1, we go from 36 to 44, so, you know, that's an increase appropriately. You know, then what I found interesting is 2 to 3 is 60 to 74, which to me means we're not finding those 14 soon enough. That doesn't just materialize at 2nd grade to 3rd grade. We need to continue to move that bar up a little bit in terms of finding them, because the sooner we remediate, the better off we'll be in many cases, not in all cases. But then, you know, this looked to me, because of some of the other drops that we have, or missing out of district students as well. Like, I'm surprised we went from 63 to 50 for the 8th to 9th grade class.
And thank you for pointing that out. This enrollment data for our special ed students are in-district special ed students only, does not include our 52 out-of-district students this year.
So that would be.
So I will add those in as well, add those students.
Okay. Otherwise, I appreciate this breakdown. We haven't really seen this kind of granularity in the past, so I just want to thank you for that as well. I think it's important for us as we think both budget-wise and program-wise and things like that.
Yeah, I'll just build on Tom's, not a knock on Tom, that may have sounded or felt like a critical comment. This is the first time we've seen these breakouts, so I think we're just sort of refining how to make the most out of them is I think where this feedback's coming from, and I agree with those comments. Because in years past, we've just looked at the building and grade breakdowns, and so it's great to see sort of more granularity here.
I also agree. I think the broader you look, the more we can really understand where we've been and where we've been.
Yeah.
Thank you. I will.
Okay, anything else on enrollment? All right, then we will move on to the town school agreement related to the end of year report. And Ms. Baton, you have the lead on this one as well.
Yes, so very, very briefly, the town school agreement is an agreement that was established by the town of Reading and the school department, and it's required by the Department of Elementary and Secondary Ed. And what it is essentially an agreement for what expenses the town will report to DESE as funding being spent on behalf of the schools. So in addition to the town meeting appropriation that's given to school committee every year, the town of Reading also spends dollars on categories like healthcare benefits and utilities and physical plant improvements, which are all spent on the town side on behalf of the school department. So this agreement lays out in very specific terms what we can claim on the end of year report as those town expenditures. During our last year's audit, end of year report audit, the auditor pointed out that he would like, or Melanson would like, us to specify further the costs incurred by the town related to the core facilities budget. So in the revised agreement, all I did was articulate and specify exactly what those other costs are. We are not changing the agreement or our practice in any way. It's just defining it better within the agreement. So it's before you for review and vote. And if you do vote, we'll send it over to our town manager and town finance director for signature, and we'll use this actually for the FY23 end of year report, given the date.
Okay. We'll see if anybody has any questions, but can we start with the motion?
I move to approve the amended town school agreement as included in the packet to become effective for FY23 end of year reporting.
Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Tom. Any discussion or questions for Ms. Baton? Chuck?
I have a question. Thank you. Did Melanson Heath, was just a recommendation, or was it that they say that, how serious was it that
It was in their finding letter, and they asked that we specify, I actually included the language. It reads that the written agreement.
Sorry.
The recommendation, the written agreement should be updated. In fact, if you see that we made the effort to break out maintenance of school grounds,
Right.
we just didn't break out all the other core expenditures. And again, this won't change the way that we report the data, it's
Right.
just more clear.
So Susan, if I could just say that another way, just make sure I understand. We're essentially just documenting the practice that was already in place.
Correct.
Okay.
Right, that's what, yeah, we're already doing.
Yeah, right.
Yes.
Okay. Any other questions or discussion? Okay, we'll take a vote. All in favor? All opposed? 6-0. Okay, and then finally, Ms. Baton again with the end of year financial summary, and we've got some budget transfers to consider.
We do. I just wanted to mention that the school department, ended the FY22 fiscal year having spent $49,492,000 with a appropriated budget of $49,695,000. We ended the year with a surplus of about $203,000, and those dollars have been turned back to the town in the form of free cash. This is one of the lowest, or is the lowest amount that we've turned back to the town in the last 5 years. But I did want to note that we were able to turn back $338,000 by closing a number of prior year purchase orders that were holding funds aside and not being of any use to the town or schools. So those dollars, in addition to the $203,000, have been deposited into free cash and now can be certified and used for the community's priorities.
Can I just,
I wanted to share that in the recommendations, in order to end the year with either zero balances or positive balances in our cost centers, there's a recommendation to move $444,000, $584 from regular day, and I've broken out which cost centers those dollars should be moved to. Next, I'll just mention that in terms of grants and revolving funds, for grants, we've essentially tidied up and cleaned up all of our past balances by spending our oldest grants, our oldest grant balances first. In total, we spent $2,080,000 in grants over this past year. And special revenue funds, clearly our user fees were up. I feel like we really saw somewhat of a shift back to normal. Our food service and extended day programs had the highest gain in our special revenue funds. I've shared during my opening report this evening the successes that our food service program is realizing, which is wonderful because we'll see even more gain this year and have more funds to reinvest into the program. And then our extended day has ended the year last year with a balance of $384,000, which in fact will be reinvested. I think Chris Nelson, our director, was here before the school committee perhaps 2 meetings ago requesting or sharing with you that he has moved forward and increased wages the first time in 10 years. So that's one way this fund balance will go to improving the recruitment and retention efforts of that program and hopefully being able to remove students, I think more than 100 students off the waiting list. And those are essentially the highlights of our end of year report. Before I close, with the help of Kate Finnegan, who is our finance and business analyst, we completed the DESE end-of-year report, and I'll be sharing with you at the next meeting a summary of the end-of-year report and the major revenue and expenditure categories in relation to the last 3 years, just to share with you how the progress of our spending and receipts have sorry, how the progress of our financials have panned out over this last year and in relationship to the last few years.
Thank you. Chuck, did you have a question?
I think I answered, but on the, why are we not showing the 338 in that number of 20? Because it was a different point in time?
Yes, that was in prior fiscal years.
Okay, that's what
Yes,
15 to 21, is it?
that's right, from FY 2015 through 2021.
So is that reflected in these numbers in the table? Did we sort of restate
No,
those, the
it
number we
isn't,
turned
right.
back?
No, because those funds in the encumbered purchase orders no longer were available to us, so they no longer were a part of our appropriation. They just sat essentially.
They were just tied up.
They were just tied up.
Yeah, okay. I think Chuck's probably thinking in the same vein I am, which is as we have a conversation about the use of free cash next month.
Well, we need to
You know,
make sure that
that's
that
part of the,
good
that's part of the
deed
kitty
gets
that went back.
noticed.
Yeah. Yeah. Go ahead, Carla. Yep.
I feel like we need to, you're always saddled with the last presentation of the evening at like 11 o'clock at night, which is impressive. And the information that you just gave us, I feel like we just need to give you like a huge round of applause for like finding this money, putting it to good use. The graphic which talks about the turn back to free cash, to me, is like, was my most exciting piece of the whole packet. Like, and you were still able to fund all these extra opportunities for students this year. I thank you. Like, you've done an unbelievable job.
Yeah, I agree. I don't, we certainly don't want to see zero, right? Because that's a high wire act that none of us are interested in, but 200,000 feels a lot better than 831,000, so.
Well, there were things that went into that.
I know.
Number that.
I know, yeah.
Special education things.
Yep. All right, any other comments or questions on the end of year piece before we take a motion for the balance transfers?
One more thing, I wanted to thank our team, because if we weren't kind of looking at this and working on this throughout the year, we wouldn't have identified these funds early, and we wouldn't have spent them on all of these incredibly important programs and curriculum and other materials. I mean, to have identified these savings and then immediately put into place a February and April vacation program, it really speaks to the team. And I'm just really proud of our leadership team. I'm so pleased to be here.
Excellent. Okay, is there a motion?
Yes. I move to approve the transfer of $444,584 from the regular day cost center to the following cost centers: $327,530 to special education, $23,485 to facilities, $21,679 to school health, $14,146 to athletics, $37,547 to extracurricular, and $20,196 to technology.
Is there a second?
Second. Aaron.
I'm going to give that one to Aaron.
Yeah.
Okay. Any further discussion? Ms. Baton, did we got all the numbers right? That sounded good? Okay. Any further discussion on the balance transfers? Budget transfers, rather? Seeing none, we will take a vote. All in favor? All opposed? And that carries 6-0.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, that brings us to the conclusion of our agenda. Is there a final motion?
Motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn from Aaron. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Chuck. All in favor? 6-0. We are opposed.
We're opposed.
We are adjourned.